one of the most shocking and mysterious cases in Canada's criminal history, remained unsolved for nearly half a century. Despite many people losing hope of ever learning the truth, the victims' parents never stopped fighting for justice. And just recently, thanks to advancements in forensic science and modern technology, this perplexing case was finally cracked. Sharon Prior was born in the winter of 1959 in the picturesque city of Montreal. Her mother, who was born in Great Britain, had immigrated to Canada with her family at a young age and spent her entire life there. It was in Canada that fate brought her together with her future husband, George, who served in the Canadian Army. The young couple fell in love at first sight and soon got married. Shortly after, their firstborn child, Sharron, came into the world. Just a couple of days before the little girl's second birthday, her mother gave birth to two more children, twins named Doreen and Maureen. In 1962, George was transferred to the city of Manitoba for military service, where he moved with his family. Their new home was located in one of the city's older neighborhoods, which was nevertheless considered quite safe and peaceful. Sometime after the move, the couple welcomed another child, a son they named George Jr. Unfortunately, soon after this, problems began to arise in the family, and the tension in the relationship reached a critical point. As a result, in 1965, the couple decided to divorce. George continued his military service and was often away, while his ex-wife and 4 children moved into an apartment in the city of Langley, which they were provided through a special assistance program for military families. It was a quiet and cozy place, ideal for raising children. The woman had no idea that even in such peaceful neighborhoods, true monsters in human form could be lurking. From childhood, Sharon was an incredibly kind, caring, and compassionate girl. She was always ready to help those in need, whether it was a person or a defenseless animal. The girl often picked up stray cats and dogs off the streets, especially those that had suffered from human cruelty or illness. She lovingly cared for them, nursed them back to health, and only then sought new owners for them. Sharon adored animals and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian in the future. In addition, the girl was passionate about sports and creativity. She attended a hockey club, art classes, and even took needlework lessons. It seemed that a wonderful future full of bright events and accomplishments awaited her. Her mother couldn't be more proud of her eldest daughter, who was growing up to be independent, responsible, and sensible beyond her years. Sharon always tried to avoid bad company and trouble, but unfortunately, even this did not save her from a fatal encounter with true evil. In 1975, life was going on as usual for the Prior family. 16-year-old Sharon, like all teenagers, was facing typical problems and difficulties for her age. She loved trendy music and stylish clothes, which her parents did not always approve of. In addition, the girl had started dating a boy named John, who had been in love with her since the 4th grade. He had finally managed to win Sharon's heart, and the young couple began seeing each other. They often hung out with friends and seemed like the perfect match. Seeing their sincere feelings, the girl's parents supported the relationship. According to Sharon's mother, she and her daughter never had any serious arguments. There was always mutual understanding and respect between them. The girl was surrounded by only good people, but even they could not protect her from the terrible tragedy that shattered the life of the entire family. March 29th, 1975, began like any ordinary day. Sharon woke up and had breakfast while her mother was out shopping for Easter groceries and gifts. Upon returning home, the woman brought the purchases inside, and her eldest daughter helped put them away. This day was supposed to be special for the whole family. The mother's friends were planning to visit with their son Stephen, as well as her boyfriend. Sharon spent most of the day painting Easter eggs and preparing for the holiday. Stephen arrived before the other guests and played with the girl's younger brother. After school, Sharon and Stephen were going to stop by the local sports association, which in addition to sports also did needlework. The girl was supposed to pick up a special jacket there, which was called Leo, named after one of the organization's founders who had died of leukemia. This jacket was a symbol of membership in the association, but it was not simply handed out. To earn such a reward, children had to prove themselves, for example, by selling lottery tickets. Sharon really wanted to deserve this jacket, and managed to sell enough tickets. Therefore, she eagerly and proudly went to the association to collect her prize. But disappointment awaited the girl. There was no jacket in her size available. Saddened, Sharon had to return home empty-handed with Stephen. However, She did not lose her festive mood and decided to pick up the jacket another time. Upon returning, the girl joined her mother and her boyfriend Doug, helping them with the final preparations. When all the guests had gathered, a wonderful holiday dinner took place. Afterward, Sharon and her mom hid painted eggs around the house for the younger children to have fun searching for later. Then the girl asked her mother for permission to go to the local Marina Pizzeria, which was a popular hangout spot for teenagers and was located not far from their home. The woman had already allowed her daughter to go there with friends many times before, so this time was no exception. Sharon went to her room to get ready. Around 6 o'clock in the evening, a neighborhood girl stopped by the Prior's house. She sat with Sharon and chatted while the latter was getting dressed to go out. Our story's heroine borrowed one of her mom's sweaters and put on her favorite suede jacket. At 6:30, the girls left the house. But Sharon went to the pizzeria alone. The neighbor changed her mind about accompanying her. The girls said goodbye and each went their separate way, one home and the other to meet up with friends. A whole group of young people had already gathered at Marina, waiting for Sharon. But for some reason, she did not show up at the appointed time. The teenagers figured the girl had simply decided to take a little walk with her boyfriend John, so they continued their merry feast, unaware that something bad had happened. At this time, John and a few friends were at home watching a hockey match. When the game ended, the boys also headed to the pizzeria, hoping to find Sharon there. But she never came. John was extremely surprised because he hadn't seen his girlfriend since school and had no idea where she could be. Like the others, he thought that after the match, he would definitely find Sharon at Marina. Her absence alarmed everyone present, as it was completely out of character for the always punctual and responsible girl. While Sharon was away from home, her mother put the younger children to bed and spent the evening in front of the TV. The woman began to worry that her daughter had still not returned, even though she should have been home a long time ago. However, she decided not to panic prematurely, assuming the girl had simply lost track of time in the company of friends or with her boyfriend. The mother remained waiting in the living room so as not to miss the moment when Sharon would finally come home. But the hours passed, and the girl was still nowhere to be seen. Around midnight, the woman could no longer contain her fear, as there was still no word from her daughter. It was awkward to call her friends at such a late hour, so the mother had to wait until morning, periodically glancing out the window in the hope of seeing Sharon. At the first light of dawn, the alarmed woman began calling her daughter's acquaintances, hoping to find out where she might be. But neither her girlfriends nor boyfriend John had any idea about the girl's whereabouts. The mother's worst suspicions were confirmed that evening. Sharon had not made it to the pizzeria. The neighbor girl with whom they had left the house together confirmed that she had parted ways with Sharon on the street and had not seen her since. A conversation with Mary, Sharon's closest friend, further heightened the anxiety. From her, the mother learned that, after 7 o'clock in the evening, an attack had occurred near the pizzeria on a 23-year-old woman named Rori. An unknown man had lunged at her with a knife, but luckily, there were people passing by at that moment. Hearing the victim's screams, they scared off the attacker, and he fled in the direction from which Sharon was supposed to come. According to witnesses, it was a tall, dark-haired man with blue eyes and a mustache. He spoke in a quiet, calm voice and was wearing a ski jacket, blue jeans, and pointed-toe shoes. Hearing these details, Sharon's mother was seized by panic. She realized that the place and time of the attack exactly coincided with the route her daughter usually took. The woman immediately went to the police, but the detectives were in no hurry to jump to premature conclusions. Instead of immediately accusing someone of the crime, they decided to launch a large-scale search operation without delay. Hundreds of concerned citizens who learned about the girl's disappearance joined the search. They were given a photo and description of the 16-year-old schoolgirl and combed every corner in the hope of finding her. The mother appeared on local television to tell the community about what had happened. She begged anyone with any information to report it to the police and help find her daughter. Unfortunately, the search yielded no results. Several days passed, but no leads on Sharon's whereabouts emerged. The mother continued to believe that the girl would return home safe and sound. The police tried to maintain hope in her, although they themselves understood that after the critical 48 hours, the chances of finding the teenager alive were rapidly dwindling. Sharon had no reason to run away from home, no conflicts with her parents, or problems at school. Her boyfriend John was a decent young man, and their relationship was filled with love and understanding. He definitely could not have hurt the girl. And in general, Sharon did not have conflicts with anyone and stayed away from bad company. That is why, at the beginning of the investigation, the police had neither suspects nor leads. Attempts to locate the knife-wielding man seen in the area also proved fruitless. The tense silence dragged on, exhausting the missing girl's mother, who continued to hope for a miracle. On the morning of April 1st, around 6 o'clock, the woman woke up and looked out the window. What she saw seemed extremely suspicious to her. A young man came out of the house of Sharon's friend, crossed the street, and took the newspaper left on the doorstep of their home. Gripped by a bad premonition, the mother called out to him, trying to understand what made the guy get up so early and steal someone else's newspaper. But instead of answering, he only quickened his pace, hurrying to leave. The woman ran out into the street and caught up with the young man. He tried to hold onto the newspaper, but the distraught mother snatched it from his hands. The guy shouted, begging her not to look, but it was too late. On the front page was a photo of a girl's body found in the snow just a few minutes' drive from their home in the suburbs. The woman was shocked not only by this terrible news, but also by the fact that the police had not informed her, even though they should have. She learned the truth much later than her neighbors, who had read the morning papers. The mother tried to convince herself that the deceased was not Sharon, but simply some schoolgirl who resembled her. Finally composing herself, she called the police to dispel the chilling suspicion. The detectives replied that they were not yet certain of the victim's identity and invited the woman to come for identification. She was so horrified that she could not bring herself to do it, so she asked her ex-husband to go in her place. The entire neighborhood was in shock, as the girl in the photo did indeed bear a strong resemblance to the missing Sharon. Moreover, her clothing exactly matched the description the mother had given to the police. The father immediately recognized his daughter in the deceased, leaving no doubt. The 16-year-old schoolgirl was dead. Her body was discovered by a local resident who had learned about the girl's disappearance from the newspapers. When he saw the corpse, he immediately realized that he had found Sharon. The man promptly reported the terrible find and the fact that someone had trespassed on his property. He always kept all the doors locked, but on Tuesday, he noticed that the lock was broken, although there were no signs of a break-in. As if the perpetrator had used his own key, even though only the owner had free access to the house. Going out to the driveway, the man saw a woman's body, naked from the waist down. At the same time, nothing was missing from the house. Jack could not understand why someone had dumped the corpse on his property. The police arrived at the scene and began a murder investigation. Law enforcement officers immediately noted the brutality of the crime. There were numerous traces of beatings, bruises, and hemorrhages on the body. The victim was wearing only a suede jacket and a blue sweater, completely undressed below the waist. Her jeans were found a few meters from the body, and her underwear was hanging in a nearby tree. The mouth was taped with a heavily chewed tape tangled in her hair. The girl was posthumously clutching it in her hand, apparently. She had been trying with her last strength to free herself. Traces in the snow indicated that Sharon had tried to get up, meaning the killer had left her to die while she was still alive. The tortured schoolgirl simply did not have enough strength to save herself. Law enforcement officers also found other physical evidence at the crime scene. About 50 feet from the dead girl, tire tracks remained on the ground. A barely noticeable trail of blood droplets led from this point to the body. Since there were no signs of dragging, the detectives assumed that several people might have been involved in the murder. No dirt was found on Sharon herself, her socks, or her shoes, so she had not crawled on her own. Most likely, she was carried out of a car and left to die in the cold. Not far from the tortured schoolgirl lay a man's shirt. The victim's wrists bore traces of being tied up, apparently. She had been bound with this very garment. The find helped establish that the prime suspect in this brutal crime was quite tall. Near the gatepost, he left another important clue, a clear shoe print. A receipt for the Leo jacket, which the unfortunate girl never had a chance to receive, was also found there. The results of the forensic examination showed that Sharon's death had occurred just a few hours before the body was discovered. Obviously, she'd been held captive from Saturday to Tuesday, subjected to abuse and rape. There were characteristic marks of strangulation on her neck. The girl had choked on her own blood. Forensic experts also recorded that her ribs were literally crushed. It appeared as if the executioner had been kneeling on the victim's chest. In addition, the poor girl had suffered a severe head injury and internal bleeding. Her body was covered with numerous stab wounds, and her jaw was broken on both sides. The nose was also smashed, and the cheek was torn by her own knocked-out tooth. Hundreds of townspeople came to the local Presbyterian church to say goodbye to Sharon Prior. Her mother could barely stand, paralyzed by grief. The only thing she could think about at that moment was for the murderer to be caught and punished as soon as possible. 3 blocks away from Sharon's brutal murder, Canada had already faced a similar crime against a minor. On July 9, 1974, in Stogai, 12-year-old Norma O'Brien was brutally killed. That evening, she had left home intending to play water polo at the pool, but upon arriving, the girl found that it was closed for repairs. Norma turned around and started walking home. She never made it there. That same evening, her parents raised the alarm, reporting their daughter missing. They categorically rejected the possibility of her running away, so the search began immediately. The next day, the schoolgirl's mutilated, half-naked body was found in a field near the pool. There were striking parallels between the murders of Norma and Sharon. Both girls were partially undressed, raped, brutally beaten, and strangled. Moreover, the attack sites were located within a half-hour drive of each other. This led to the idea that the crimes could have been committed by the same maniac. But the investigators had no leads. Already after the massacre of Sharon on June 23, 1975, another girl went missing in Stogai, 14-year-old Debbie Fisher. She was returning home on a red bicycle, but never arrived. The next day, her naked body was found in the woods. Unlike the previous victims, Debbie had not been raped. The cause of death was a blow to the head with a rock. Soon, a 17-year-old boy was arrested for this crime, and he confessed to the deed. Due to his status as a minor, his name and photo were not disclosed. The killer recounted that on that day, around 6:30 in the evening, he was riding home from work on his moped. Suddenly, he spotted Debbie pedaling her bicycle with a bottle of milk in her hand. He scrutinized the girl closely, and a chilling plan took shape in his mind. After greeting her, to which she responded in kind, the guy overtook her and hid his moped in the bushes. Then he sat down on the curb and pretended to be crying. Debbie, seeing this, stopped. The young man asked her to come closer, which she did. At that very moment, the scoundrel grabbed the girl and began groping her. Snatching the bottle from her hands, he hurled it into the field, and then, with all his might, he struck Debbie on the head with a rock. The schoolgirl lost consciousness. Hiding her bicycle in the bushes, the pervert tried to rape the victim but failed. Enraged by the setback, he hit the girl with the rock once more. Debbie died from the injury sustained. The criminal hid the lifeless body in an abandoned car in the woods and fled on his moped. Later, Debbie Fisher's murderer also confessed to killing Norma O'Brien a year earlier. But he insisted that he had nothing to do with Sharon Prior's death. At the time of her demise, the young man had a confirmed alibi, so he was not considered a suspect in this case. He was convicted only for the murders of the 2 other girls. However, given his minor status, the punishment was not too severe a few years behind bars. Now, the former juvenile killer lives and works in Montreal. At the site where Sharon Prior's body was discovered, the police collected a lot of evidence that should have led them to the murderer. The detectives hoped to solve this case within a matter of days, but reality proved far from their expectations. 13 months had passed, and the investigators still did not have a prime suspect against whom they could bring an official charge. Law enforcement officers questioned 38 individuals who had somehow crossed paths with the girl on that fateful evening. 6 of them were detained, as they fit the description. The police were particularly interested in Frank Daly, the manager of the pizzeria where Sharon was going to hang out. But in the end, everyone was released for lack of evidence. The victims' close friends were not overlooked either. All of them had alibis. Some were hanging out at the pizzeria, while others were watching a sports match at home. Gradually, the investigation reached a dead end. No fresh information was coming in, and all leads and clues turned out to be false. It seemed that the investigation had completely stalled everyone, except the murdered girls. Mother had given up. The woman could not come to terms with the loss, and continued to search for at least some details that would shed light on the circumstances of her daughter's death. She understood that on that evening, Sharon could hardly have walked far from the house. Around the same time the girl headed for the pizzeria, One of their neighbors was supposed to be returning from work. For years, he had been walking the same route every day. That ill-fated day was no exception, but the man claimed that he had not seen the girl on the trail. Considering that Sharon did not make it to Marina, she must have been intercepted almost immediately after parting with her friend. The perpetrator had a very narrow time window, but he managed to fit into it perfectly to abduct the schoolgirl without being seen by anyone. The investigators never managed to find a witness to the attack. It was as if it were the perfect crime. The grief-stricken mother was convinced that it was worth taking a closer look at all the residents of their street. One of them might have noticed a suspicious stranger, or recognized him if the attacker himself lived nearby. The detectives were inclined to believe that the killer and rapist was a fairly young guy who most likely still lived with his parents. In their opinion, he had certain mental deviations, perverted fantasies, or something similar that provoked rage and hatred towards women in him. The police suspected that this attack was not his first, and if the maniac was not stopped soon, it might not be the last. The investigators were also sure that several people were involved in the abduction and abuse of poor Sharon. The investigators considered the possibility that the elusive knife-wielding attacker who had assaulted another girl named Cheryl around the same time might have been involved in the crime. Back then, he was thwarted by passers-by, so the perpetrator was forced to flee. Thanks to witnesses, a verbal portrait of this man was compiled, but despite all the efforts of the police, he still could not be found. The likelihood that two maniac kidnappers would be operating simultaneously in one of the city's quietest neighborhoods was extremely low. Therefore, the detectives assumed that the attack on Cheryl and Sharon's murder were committed by the same person. The criminal's behavior indicated that he was well-oriented in the area. He managed to move about unnoticed, leaving no traces and arousing no suspicion among local residents. The investigators agreed with the victim's mother most likely. The killer lived somewhere nearby. His nature was defined as sadistic. People with such perversions usually act according to a certain pattern. At first, they present themselves as charming and sweet, trying to attract gullible victims. Having lured them into their nets, the sadists become increasingly cruel and demanding with each step. It all starts with control, then comes the turn of humiliation and outright abuse. It is according to this scenario that their love affairs with women often develop. But eventually, even this is not enough for the pervert. He turns into a predator who goes out to hunt for new victims. Given this, the police considered it necessary to carefully check all residents of the neighborhood who had convictions for harassment and domestic violence. But first and foremost, the investigators sought to track down the mysterious knife-wielding attacker who had targeted Cheryl. He fit the killer's profile: perfectly low communication skills, since he preferred to communicate with the help of a cold weapon, lack of success in life, and low intelligence. This personality type literally left its imprint on Sharon's mutilated body. Judging by the severity of the beatings, he was accustomed to getting his way not by persuasion or cunning, but by brute force. Obviously, the maniac could not restrain himself, easily flaring up with anger and instantly resorting to violence. The most terrifying realization was that the police were probably dealing with a serial killer who needed to be stopped as soon as possible. At the moment, the murderer was one step ahead of his pursuers. The law enforcement officers were making every effort to track him down. But at that time, many modern technologies that greatly facilitate the work of investigators did not yet exist: DNA analysis, surveillance cameras, tracking phones by geolocation, and so on. The detectives' hands were tied. They were acting too slowly and unprofessionally. The killer took advantage of this to strike again. 6 years after the discovery of Sharon's mutilated body, a 12-year-old schoolgirl named Tammy Lakey became the sadist's victim. It is quite possible that the inhuman decided to switch to defenseless little girls, confident in his impunity after the massacre of 16-year-old Sharon. The examination of Tammy's remains was carried out by the same experts who had investigated the murder of the maniac's first victim. They immediately noticed the striking similarity in the criminal's modus operandi, which became additional evidence in favor of the serial killer theory. On March 20th, 1981, Tammy Lakey was visiting her grandmother. Like the previous victim, the girl disappeared a few blocks from the house where she was staying. The elderly woman was unwell and asked her granddaughter to go to the store, but she never returned. The only find on the girl's way to the store was her glasses, which were lying on the sidewalk. They were noticed by the schoolgirl's mother when she was returning home. The frightened woman immediately reported her daughter's disappearance to the police. Soon, a witness was found who had seen a man in a beige raincoat jump out of a small red car and forcibly push a screaming girl into the vehicle. That same evening, a barely alive Tammy was discovered out in the open. A man called the police station and told them about the terrible find. The poor girl was lying on the ground naked, covered only with her own clothes. Medics desperately fought for the child's life, but the injuries were incompatible with life. The girl had been strangled. Although there were no signs of rape on her body, traces of male semen were found on her belongings. As in the previous case, the attacker acted remarkably sloppily, leaving behind a lot of evidence. But none of it brought the investigation closer to solving these horrific crimes. Despite the persistent efforts of the detectives, the investigation reached a dead end. At this time, similar attacks on young girls and little girls were also taking place in neighboring regions of Canada. In particular, in 1978, the body of 17-year-old Lisa Blais was found dead in Montreal, just a few meters from her own home. Early in the morning, she was returning from a disco club when someone hit her hard on the head, raped, and killed her. The perpetrators of this crime were never found. There were so many similar cases that the police were simply lost in speculation as to whether all these cases were connected. In 2000, Sharon's mother turned to the police once again. The woman insisted on reanalyzing all the materials in her daughter's case. In the quarter century that had passed since then, science and technology had made a huge leap forward. Forensic scientists had at their disposal new, more effective, and accurate methods, particularly DNA analysis. But the answer that the grief-stricken mother received by mail a week later struck her to the very heart. It turned out that most of the physical evidence collected in the year of Sharon's death had mysteriously disappeared back in 1995. Among the few surviving items were only the girl's clothing and that of the alleged suspect. Forensic experts carefully examined the man's shirt found at the crime scene. They managed to isolate a DNA sample that did not belong to the victim herself. However, even after cross-referencing with the genetic profile database, no match could be found. The obtained biological material was carefully preserved for future comparison with samples from potential suspects. Later, this find became the key to solving the chilling case. In June 2004, the police received information about a garage where the killer might have held Sharon captive. The detectives immediately went to the site, but despite a thorough search, they could not find a single piece of physical evidence that would tie the premises to the crime. Law enforcement officers seized 3 DNA samples, but none of them matched either the genetic material of the deceased schoolgirl or the biological traces on her clothing. In the end, this lead was deemed unpromising. The next unexpected turn in this high-profile case occurred in 2012. An unknown benefactor publicly announced a substantial monetary reward as much as $10,000 for any information that would help track down the brutal murderer who had taken the lives of 2 young girls. This event suggested that the investigation had made progress, and the police had some new data at their disposal. For the convenience of all concerned citizens who would like to share their guesses and speculations with law enforcement, a special telephone hotline was opened. Although the investigation continued, as dozens of times before, no breakthrough was achieved. The investigators returned once again to the unsolved episode with the attack on Cheryl, hoping to finally establish the identity of the perpetrator. The girl who had chased away the knife-wielding attacker and managed to get a good look at his face agreed to undergo a hypnosis session. In an altered state of consciousness, she was shown photographs of various men, including the infamous serial killer William Patrick Fife. It was him that the witness identified as bearing a strong resemblance to that man. Patrick turned out to be a Canadian maniac whose guilt in the deaths of 5 women in Montreal was proven in court. Although he himself claimed that he had at least 9 victims, the rest of the bodies could not be found. The detectives had long suspected that Fife might be involved in the murders of young girls and had tried in every way to find a connection between him and these chilling crimes. However, the experienced murderer persistently denied his guilt, claiming that he had first taken someone's life no earlier than 1979. Recall that Sharon was brutally killed back in 1975. The charges against Patrick in this case remained mere assumptions. Later, law enforcement officers tried to link the deaths of the schoolgirls with other dangerous Canadian criminals. Suspicion fell on Mike French, a member of the notorious Montreal motorcycle club, the Satans. In 1975, when the bloody massacre of Sharon took place, Mike lived in the same area, and 2 years later, he moved to another city with his parents. French acquaintances characterized him as an extremely aggressive and cruel person, quite capable of killing a child. There were even several witnesses who allegedly heard Mike boasting about his involvement in Sharon's brutal murder. But here, too, fortune turned its back on the law enforcers. In November 1982, during a bloody showdown between rival gangs, French was shot dead. He took all the secrets about his possible involvement in the attacks on the girls to his grave. By the way, the police failed to solve his own death as well. But all these versions remained nothing more than theoretical speculations, which had no solid evidence to support them. The inconsolable Prior family was extremely disappointed with the unprofessionalism of the investigators, who were unable to establish the identity of the real killer. The relatives of the deceased girl swore to seek just punishment for the scoundrel who had abused their child until their last breath. Sharon's mother viewed this grueling fight not only as a matter of honor for her family, but also as a moral obligation to all parents whose children were ruined by perverts and sadists. In 2019, the disconsolate woman took part in the filming of a TV show, along with 9 other families devastated by similar tragedies. They publicly accused law enforcement of incompetence and negligence. Police representatives refused to be present in the studio during the interview. The long-awaited breakthrough in this high-profile case did not occur until June 2022. Thanks to the latest advances in genetic genealogy, experts managed to find a DNA profile in the database that matched the sample taken from the man's shirt at the scene of Sharon's murder. The most likely owner of the genetic material turned out to be Franklin Romine, who had died under mysterious circumstances back in 1982. His remains had to be exhumed to carry out all the necessary analyses. On May 23, 2023, the connection between the biological traces found at the crime scene and the DNA of the late Franklin was officially confirmed. Romine's appearance fully matched the characteristics of the suspect provided by witnesses. The man lived in the area where the abduction took place. His car perfectly matched the tire tracks found near the unfortunate Sharon's body. Franklin had a dark criminal past. In particular, he had already been convicted of assault and rape. All these facts finally allowed the dots to be connected in this chilling story. There was no one to put in the dock, of course, but at least the investigators were able to officially close the case and inform the victims' relatives who had committed this heinous crime. The murder of the 16-year-old schoolgirl was solved thanks to modern DNA analysis techniques and the persistence of her loved ones, who had tirelessly sought the truth for nearly half a century. Love is an incredibly complex feeling that can cloud the mind so intensely that it sometimes poses a serious threat to one's life. Usually, a person is able to regain control in time and avoid danger, but occasionally circumstances can be extremely unfavorable for the victim of passion. This is exactly the fate that befell the heroine of our story today. Julie Scully was the daughter of Julia and John Scully. Her childhood was filled with difficulties and hardships, so it's worth starting the story with her parents. Julie's mother was born in 1943 on an Indian reservation located in the state of New Mexico, which was the second largest in the USA. However, despite the vast territory, living conditions there were extremely challenging. The lack of electricity, running water, and jobs led to rampant alcoholism and drug addiction among the local population. When Julia turned 12, her parents, trying to protect their daughter from the detrimental influence of her environment, sent her to a boarding school, hoping that she would learn English there and acquire the necessary skills for a successful future. Upon reaching adulthood, Julia moved to the city and began living like an ordinary American. However, while working in a hospital for the mentally ill, she herself became addicted to drugs. Later, the young Native American woman met a police officer named John, and in 1964, feelings ignited between them. Just 2 days before their one-year anniversary, on July 2, 1965, the couple got married. Shortly after the wedding, John was transferred to serve in one of the most dangerous areas of North Philadelphia. On January 3, 1968, the couple had a daughter, whom they named Julia. Over the years, the girl became very close to her father. All the relatives noted that she was ready to do anything for his approval. John and Julie spent a lot of time together, often going fishing. During these moments, the girl's mother felt like an outsider in the family. While the father had fun with his daughter, the elder Julia suffered from loneliness. All this time, she hid her drug addiction from her loved ones. although those around her could not help but notice the woman's strange and unpredictable behavior. The situation only worsened as Julia moved on to even harder illegal substances. Despite this, on November 10, 1969, another baby was born into the family, a boy named John Patrick Scully. The infant immediately became the center of attention for the parents, and the elder daughter Julie began to feel a lack of love and care. At the same time, her mother continued to use illegal substances, being in a state of constant exhaustion. Any attempts to quit were accompanied by severe withdrawal. In 1973, amid all these problems, the elder Julia tried to take her own life by swallowing a whole pack of sleeping pills. But her husband found her in time, provided first aid, and called an ambulance. The doctors managed to save the woman. Now the whole family knew about her destructive addiction, but this did not improve the situation at all. The once beautiful Native American woman increasingly resembled a living corpse. Soon she tried to settle scores with life for the second time, this time due to depression. But again, she was saved. Of course, the parents' troubles could not but affect the children, especially the elder daughter, who had just turned 9 at the time. Friends came to her birthday party, but right in the middle of the celebration, her dad suddenly left. As it turned out, he went to his mistress, with whom he had been having an affair for quite some time. John considered this relationship his outlet, as his drug-addicted wife only caused him disgust. It was only the children that kept him together with Julia. On the day of his daughter's birthday, the mistress came to pick up John right at their house. The wife saw her rival with her own eyes when she went outside to see where her husband had gone. John didn't seem to be bothered at all by the fact that his secret was out. Instead, these events came as a real shock to the younger Julie and her mother. The girl began to blame herself for what happened, as she simply could not comprehend the reasons for her father's behavior. From that moment on, Julie's grades at school, where she had been an excellent student, dropped to C's. Then her father decided to transfer her to another school in Kensington. In the new educational institution, the bright and attractive Julie quickly became popular, but also fell into bad company. Truancy began, and her grades worsened again. At that time, the girl was only 12, but her appearance already attracted the attention of many boys. An additional risk factor was that the Scully family lived in a disadvantaged area. The parents grew increasingly worried that Julie might follow in her mother's footsteps and also become addicted to illegal substances. Once, Julie invited her girlfriends for a sleepover, but when her mother came to check on them in the evening, her daughter was not in the room. The girls had simply run off to have fun. The frightened woman immediately called the police, and law enforcement officers eventually managed to find the schoolgirls in downtown Philadelphia. After this incident, the relationship between Julie and her mother became even more strained. Constant conflicts and quarrels turned into a common occurrence. The girl's rebellious spirit grew stronger, even affecting her relationship with her father. But since John was a cop, he always knew where and with whom his daughter was spending time. Noticing that his wife was not coping with raising the teenagers, the man decided to take custody of the children himself. The elder Julia was sent for treatment for drug addiction. While the mother was away from home, the atmosphere in the family was much calmer. Despite the younger Julie's sincere desire to please her father, youthful maximalism took over. The girl continued to spend a lot of time with friends, skipped school, and received poor grades. Upon learning about this, John became furious. At that time, Julie was 14 years old, and she directly told her father that she wanted to quit her studies. Perhaps such a protest was caused by a lack of parental attention and support. It should be noted that by that time, Julie had already turned into a real beauty and invariably found herself at the center of attention at any party. So it's not surprising that the girl preferred entertainment to trying to earn her father's approval. At 14, Julie had already begun her sexual life. In 1982, she graduated from high school, and her parents, of course, hoped that their daughter would pursue higher education. John, using his official position, arranged with the administration of an engineering school for Julie to be admitted outside the competition. The man insisted that his daughter, a Native American, should be given certain preferences. Eventually, his efforts paid off, and in the fall of 1983, the girl became a student at the educational institution her father had dreamed of. Julie's younger brother chose a different path in life. Despite growing up under identical conditions, as soon as he turned 16, the boy enlisted in the Navy. As for Julia, she decided that she had had enough shortly after entering the engineering school. She dropped out and got a job, striving for financial independence. Around the same time, the girl started a romance with Neil Ziegler, who was 6 years older than her. Their relationship developed rapidly, and already in November 1985, just a few months before Julie's 18th birthday, the couple got married. The marriage was kept secret even from the bride's own father. The union with an adult man brought Julie not only material well-being, but also emotional stability. When John finally found out about the secret wedding, he approved of his daughter's choice, believing that marriage would be better for her than living with a drug-addicted mother. But this marriage turned out to be short-lived in 1988. The couple divorced, and Julie was forced to return to her mother. At her new job, the girl did not even try to help her mom financially or pay for her own living expenses in her mother's house. Instead, Julie immersed herself in the world of beauty and entertainment. Her appearance was in full bloom at that time wherever this girl appeared. She invariably attracted admiring glances. Many considered Julie to be a professional model. Realizing the power of her charm, the young woman began to actively take advantage of her attractiveness. Despite her inner fragility and vulnerability, she desperately sought love, although she only found short-term affairs. Suitors swarmed around the beauty, inviting her on dates and to parties. In the summer of 1989, at a reception at a yacht club, Julie met Tim, a handsome man 11 years her senior. Tim owned a thriving landscaping business and could afford a luxurious lifestyle, including his own yacht. Back in the early 1980s, he founded his company, and since then, his career had been steadily on the rise, which was greatly facilitated by the boom in the U.S. real estate market. The romance between Julie and Tim developed stormily, and it almost immediately became apparent that the girl had a very jealous nature. Once, Tim met his secretary, with whom he had worked for more than a year, at a bar. Seeing them together, Julie attacked Tim's friend with her fists and smashed her lover's face. The girl didn't even listen to explanations that it was a purely business meeting. Later, the conflict was settled, but it became a vivid illustration of Julie's difficult temper. The girl had long dreamed of a modeling career, and then, in one of the newspapers, she came across an ad for a beauty contest. Julie became fired up with the idea of participating in the competition, and Tim was sure that his beloved would definitely win. The lovers selected the most striking photos of the girl and sent them to the editorial office of the magazine organizing the contest. But after some time, it turned out that the contest was a fiction this way. The publishers simply lured gullible beauties in order to get spicy photos for the men's section on the last pages for free. Once, when visiting his office, Tim did not find his secretary at her desk. Instead, Julie was sitting there who, with a charming smile, informed him that the former assistant would not return. Just like that, without further ado, she simply took her lover's place, leaving him no choice but to accept her as an employee. This clever maneuver allowed Julie to work remotely from home, and at the same time provided financial independence and freedom of action. All this time, Julie did not stop monitoring the mail, hoping to receive a response from the magazine holding the beauty contest. But the expected letter never came, and this infuriated the girl. When she finally realized that she would not be awarded any prizes, she decided to act radically. Julie burst right into the editor-in-chief's office, shaking with rage. She demanded an explanation for why she had not yet received the award for her victory. In the end, the editor accepted her photos and promised to publish them in the next issue. The girl blabbed to everyone about her triumph and began actively preparing for the upcoming contest, which indeed took place sometime later in a posh hotel. 12 finalists attended this beauty competition, including Julie. But despite all her efforts, the judging panel gave preference to other participants. Only one jury member voted for our heroine. However, even this unfortunate incident had its positive side. Julie made friends with an editor named Cheryl. It was thanks to this acquaintance that the girl's photo made it onto the magazine's cover and on billboards hung all over the city. Such publicity brought Julie even more attention, and offers for modeling work poured in. By the fall of 1990, the girl had already become a local celebrity. This process was gaining tremendous momentum. Julie continued to work for Tim, but at the same time managed to win prizes at local beauty contests. True, she was met with failure on the serious runway. On November 16, 1991, the young couple got married. At that time, the bride had turned 23. The couple earned a good income and did not deny themselves anything. Julie's modeling career slowly moved upward until 1997, and her income grew accordingly. Later, the aspiring model appeared on television, but along with this, the girl began to abuse alcohol. The relationship with her husband resembled a roller coaster. UPS were replaced by downs, although in general, love and understanding reigned between the spouses. Tim dreamed of children, especially since their financial situation quite allowed them to have kids. But Julie stubbornly postponed this issue, fearing that pregnancy and childbirth would ruin her modeling career, which was beginning to gain momentum. Nevertheless, in February 1995, Julie became pregnant. Her girlfriends claimed that the expectant mother continued to smoke and drink throughout her pregnancy. On November 26, 1996, a girl was born, whom they named Katie Scarlett. Motherhood completely turned Julie's life around, and she enthusiastically immersed herself in raising her firstborn. During this period, her own mother, the elder Julia, finally overcame her bad habits and actively helped her daughter take care of the baby. True, due to differences in views on parenting, arguments often flared up between the women. Meanwhile, the younger Julie was hit by postpartum depression, partly due to the loss of her perfect figure after pregnancy. She kind of withdrew into herself, not even trying to regain her former shape. Against this background, her relationship with Tim also began to deteriorate. Already in April 1997, the couple was forced to turn to a family psychotherapist. It seemed to Julie that the psychologist took her husband's side, although in fact, the specialist was trying to understand the girl's deep-seated problems and complexes, touching on painful memories of the past. As a result, he concluded that Tim paid too little time and attention to his wife, which led to a crisis in their marriage. Julie felt unbearably lonely, sought solace in communicating with friends, often returning home tipsy. In November 1997, the couple planned a traditional cruise, which they usually took every year since they got married. But this time, they decided to postpone the trip in order to celebrate Christmas on board the liner. The main purpose of this cruise was to improve the relationship between Julie and Tim, while their daughter was left in the care of her grandparents. On November 1st, the couple flew to San Juan, the capital of Puerto Rico, where they boarded a cruise ship. Almost immediately, the spectacular and attractive Julie caught the attention of a young man named George Skiadopoulos, who held the lowest position in the ship's engineering department. But the next day, he introduced himself to the girl as the ship's captain. The guy even made a bet with a friend that he could get Julie into bed. George was only 22 at the time, had just graduated from college, and was just beginning his career. But despite this, the young man looked quite respectable and solid, so that Julie did not suspect any deception. The sly fellow lied to his new acquaintance that he was 28, and also bragged about a couple of his supposedly own achievements in order to impress her. Julie, who was 29 at the time, quickly became close to George. Tim saw them together a few times, but did not attach much importance to it. He was used to his wife's sociability and friendliness, as she often communicated with strangers, so he didn't even think to be jealous. On the eve of the party, the fake captain invited Julie on a tour of the engine room, which she readily agreed to. A spark ran between them, and the young people kissed, but nothing further happened for now. Upon returning home, an inspired Julie enthusiastically told her family's best friend Tony about her feelings. The girl was sure that the flash of passion would fade with initial speed, as she and George would never see each other again. But lo and behold, soon the supposed captain sent Julie a touching letter. The lovers switched to daily telephone communication. The secret admirer literally showered Julie with compliments, convincing her that Tim was not good enough for her. Tim knew about these conversations, as he accidentally overheard his wife cooing with someone on the phone a couple of times. But the man did not delve into the details of the conversations, fully trusting his better half. On the other hand, these secret relations completely baffled Julie. She seemed to be torn between the usual family comfort and a mad attraction to a young lover who gave her previously unknown acute sensations. The woman noticeably distanced herself from her husband and child, immersing herself in a whirlpool of new experiences. Tim saw that something wrong was happening and became worried. To strengthen the marriage, the man decided to arrange a lavish surprise party for Julie on the occasion of her 30th birthday. The celebration, which took place on January 3, 1998, was a great success. Julie's closest friends gathered at the birthday girl's house. As a gift, Julie persistently begged Tim for another cruise, and it had to be on a specific liner, and at a strictly defined time. Of course, her main goal was to meet George. The husband resisted in every possible way, but eventually yielded to his wife's desire. And so on February 13th, the couple again went on a short trip. On board, Julie finally united with her chosen one, and George won the bet from his shipmates. Upon returning home, an inspired Julie could not stop telling stories about her spectacular love adventure, entrusting the most intimate details to the godfather of their daughter Katie, the same family friend Tony. But even for this devoted servant, it was unbearable to keep such a burden a secret, which the man later confessed to Julie. However, this did not stop her, and our heroine decided to secretly rush to Greece to see her beloved, whom she missed so much. For Tim and the family, she portrayed this trip as a family vacation, which she would allegedly go on with her mother and daughter. Julie confessed her real intentions to her mother, but, despite the condemnation, still insisted on her own. The first stage of this adventure assumed that the entire female Scully trio would go to Florida, but already on March 26, 1998, Julie left her mother and granddaughter and rushed to Puerto Rico, into the arms of her lover. There she immersed herself in a whirlpool of passion. Upon returning from her travels, Julie did not even think to hide her relationship with George from Tim. She hung on the phone around the clock, incessantly cooing with the Greek, sent him frank love messages by email, and shot videos about her life, which she also sent to her chosen one. And Julie did all this without hiding from her lawful husband, under the same roof with him and on his money. Moreover, having completely lost all fear, the woman again began to regularly frequent parties and get drunk senseless. Tim, of course, could not help but notice his wife's strange behavior. Hoping to save the family, in the 7th year of their married life, he suggested that Julie visit a psychologist. But instead of gratitude during the very first session, she stated that she wanted a divorce. The stunned Tim flatly refused. The thing is, Julie owned a share in his business, which brought in about $1 million in profit annually. The woman desperately needed this money, as she planned to dash off to Greece with her daughter and settle there with her lover. Meanwhile, George had to undergo compulsory 20-month military service. Julie was bending over backward to help him escape to the States and get a visa, but she no longer had the money for it. Against the backdrop of all these emotional upheavals, Miss Scully began taking antidepressants. When George found out about this, he became terribly angry, strictly forbidding his beloved to take any medications. To please her chosen one, Julie undertook to get in shape. Suffering from insomnia, the girl constantly took sleeping pills and other serious drugs. At the same time, Julie exhausted herself with workouts, losing about 10 kilograms. She hoped to return to the modeling business and earn some money. But George turned out to be an even greater owner than Tim. He was terribly jealous and categorically did not approve of such intentions. As a result, the girl was forced to abandon this idea. None of Julie's relatives and friends supported her relationship with the Greek. Even Cheryl, who had once pumped up Scully in the modeling industry, openly condemned this romance. Meanwhile, the emotional state of our heroine was rapidly deteriorating. Once Tim asked his wife to give him access to business documents, but she locked the door to her room and didn't let anyone in. The police had to be called to take the papers necessary for work. And even this did not pacify the enraged Julie, who put up a frenzied resistance to law enforcement officers. At the same time, Julie developed paranoid delusions that her husband had allegedly hired a private detective to follow her. The atmosphere in the Scully house was heating up to the limit, and everything was heading towards an inevitable divorce. But while the family drama was approaching its climax, somewhere in the middle of summer, George and Julie met in the USA and secretly got engaged. The future Mrs. Skiadopoulos openly told everyone who would listen that she would soon move to Greece forever, but she hid the specific date from everyone according to the plan. This was to happen no earlier than next year. In the midst of these turbulent events, Tim received an itemized bill for his wife's international phone calls. The amount reached $6,000 to $7,000 a month. It was at that moment that the terrible truth finally dawned on the man. His wife was cheating on him with some ship engineer, and had been maintaining contact with him behind her lawful husband's back for quite some time. The enraged Scully realized that he had had enough of feeding the ungrateful traitor, and he needed to get rid of all this lies as soon as possible and formalize the divorce. He frankly made all his claims to Julie. In response to the quite justified accusations, the offended wife stated that she was depriving Tim of the right to see his daughter. Julie dreamed of complete custody of Katie in order to go to another country with the little one without hindrance. Of course, these plans met with violent resistance from her husband. While the spouses were sorting out their relationship, a new interesting circumstance appeared. George informed his beloved that he was quitting his job and would personally come to visit her in New Jersey. Due to quarrels and conflicts with Tim, Julie reached the peak of an emotional crisis. The woman experienced inhuman stress, against the background of which she even began to lose her hair. But in Scully's clouded mind, all these troubles were explained solely by the forced separation from her beloved. At the same time, the girl rapidly developed paranoia. She was mortally jealous of George to all persons of the female sex without exception, and constantly demanded that her chosen one be in touch around the clock. But as soon as the Greek arrived in New Jersey, their crazy romance finally turned into complete madness. George, who had just lost his job, constantly asked Julie how much money she had, and openly incited his beloved to the most ridiculous expenses. In order to somehow pacify the insatiable suitor, the woman began to borrow money from her own husband. At the same time, Julie completely stopped communicating with her young daughter, and had not seen her for several weeks. All this drove Tim crazy. Resentment and anger almost tore him apart from the inside. And George, as if mocking, constantly lied to Julie about his supposedly outstanding achievements and huge profits. The absurdity of the situation was that this skinny, miserable-looking, slicked-back Greek with rotten teeth did not at all resemble a wealthy, handsome man from the modeling business or an influential businessman. However, Julie's behavior was an even bigger surprise. The woman desperately loved the unprepossessing jester, groveled before him, and was ready to give up everything she had, without regret, for the sake of this insidious manipulator. Friends and family tried in every possible way to dissuade Scully from this outright madness. They sincerely could not understand how one could lose their head over an objectively unattractive, unemployed loser without certain life prospects, who was also known for his mendacity, jealousy, and propensity for violence. However, Julie seemed to have been seized by a love fever. She nurtured crazy plans about how she would spend all the money received after the divorce on an expensive hair transplant for her bald admirer, and then take care of his teeth. Tim, having learned about these wild plans of his wife, went berserk with rage. He was especially outraged by the fact that Julie was ready to involve their innocent daughter in this adventure. Scully threatened the traitor that in case Katie disappeared, he would personally see to it that the beloved daughter would never see her mother again. It seems that this promise somewhat cooled the ardor of the stubborn mistress. At least Julie herself began to tell her friends that her affair with the Greek was over. But it took only a few weeks before Scully once again dashed off with George to Greece, supposedly to test the strength of their feelings. During this trip, the woman met the pseudo-captain's parents and was completely delighted with them. It's just that, given the religiosity of her chosen one's family, Julie was forced to hide from her future relatives the existence of her daughter, her former marriage, and her modeling career. And upon returning home and from absolutely everyone else, Scully only dreamed of a life together with her beloved in fabulous Hellas. On December 6th, the day when Julie was to leave the house she still shared with Tim forever, the woman left her daughter in the care of her husband and moved to a hotel. There, Scully swallowed handfuls of psychotropic drugs and prepared to fly to Greece. Already on December 8, 1998, the lady who was head over heels in love landed in Athens. It was in this country that George and Julie planned to have a wedding and begin a new carefree life. Almost immediately after his beloved's arrival, the Greek persuaded her to open a joint bank account. Allegedly, his chosen one did not know the local language, and in general was not very good with finances. Blinded by passion, Miss Scully unreservedly trusted her liberator. Without a shadow of a doubt, she put all her savings, $80,000 in cash, into their joint account. And Julie gave her beloved another $18,000 for minor household expenses. This money was the last funds that the woman had at her disposal at that time. And soon she simply disappeared without a trace. On January 8th, Skiadopoulos called his fiancée's best American friend with terrible news: Julie had gone missing. According to the Greek, they had agreed to have a snack at a local McDonald's, but the girl never showed up for the meeting. George allegedly waited for her for several hours, but it was all in vain. And since mobile communications did not exist at that time, he had no way to inform his beloved of his concern. Eventually, after a long and unsuccessful search, the grief-stricken groom turned to the police with a statement about the disappearance of Julie Scully. Shortly before George's alarming message about Julie's disappearance, her closest friend in the States received a call from Scully herself. In the conversation, the woman admitted that she terribly missed her daughter Katie and had some problems in her relationship with her fiancé. From what was said, the friend concluded that Julie was about to leave the Greek and should return home in the near future. However, time passed, but Mrs. Scully never appeared on the doorstep of her family home. Against this background, the news from George about her friend's mysterious disappearance caused sincere horror and concern. The pseudo-captain relayed that on the day of the disappearance, Julie left her passport in the car, which was later somehow confiscated by the police. The biggest problem was that Skiadopoulos allegedly could not find the law enforcement officer who took the document in any way. This whole story sounded extremely suspicious, so the friend eventually decided to call Tim Scully, who was the only one who could help sort out the situation. The man immediately realized that his ex was in big trouble. Tim recalled that the last time Julie personally reached out to relatives in the USA was on January 7th, and since then, there had been no news of her. Around the same time, the mother of the missing woman told her son-in-law that Skiadopoulos gave the impression of a worthless and disgusting type. Besides being an unpleasant subject by nature, the Greek obviously did not keep himself in check at all. The elder Julia once witnessed with her own eyes how George attacked her daughter during a quarrel, and when the woman stood up for her child, the enraged Greek attacked her. He yelled, swore like a trooper, and then grabbed the old woman by the throat and pressed his mother-in-law against the wall with all his might. The inhuman man did not let go of the victim until she threatened to call the police. After that incident, Julie allegedly tried to break up with the sadist. She even called law enforcement, after which Skiadopoulos was deported from the country. But despite everything, after some time, the girl once again rushed after her beloved to Greece. Moreover, Julie justified this scum in every possible way, taking the blame for the incident upon herself. So Scully's mother had no doubt that this scoundrel George was definitely involved in her daughter's disappearance. However, Skiadopoulos himself tirelessly portrayed himself as an innocent lamb and provided the Greek police with all possible assistance in the search for his bride. Julius' relatives tried to contact the U.S. Embassy in Athens in parallel. Unfortunately, cooperation with the Hellenistic cops was significantly hampered by the language barrier. Not a single law enforcement officer involved in the search for the missing American woman spoke English. Then the FBI finally intervened in the case. Almost immediately, the feds found out that Julie's passport had actually been with George all these days. The Greek initially assured that he found the document much later, and when he learned about the FBI's interest in the case, he stated that the papers were simply stolen. The behavior of the main suspect seemed increasingly strange with each passing day. For example, Skiadopoulos even tried to withdraw money from his joint account with Julie, but for some reason, he failed. On January 23, 1999, the ill-fated couple was supposed to have a wedding. Instead, all the country's news TV channels and radio stations were flooded with one topic: a young woman from the USA who had gone missing. And George went berserk and threw a tantrum when he found out that his bride's closest American friend had also intervened in the publicity of this story. He screamed into the telephone receiver about his non-involvement and even made several statements to the press. The frightened Greek gave numerous interviews to various media in which he desperately tried to justify himself and prove his complete innocence. But all these efforts were in vain. Just 16 days after the disappearance of Julie Scully, George found himself in the investigator's office as the main suspect. At first, he stubbornly retold law enforcement the same fairy tales that he had been weaving for the media. However, it took less than 4 hours of painstaking work before the suspect cracked and confessed to the murder of his beloved. Skiadopoulos insisted that it was a terrible accident. It seemed that the man really regretted what he had done, because he wept throughout the interrogation. But very quickly, this story was overgrown with a whole bunch of new, absurd, and frankly false details. Getting confused in his testimony, George either convinced the cops that Julie had never disappeared at all, then again admitted his guilt, then once again renounced any crime. Eventually, the Greek gave the following story. Allegedly, shortly after moving to Greece, Julie became very disappointed in both the country itself and her chosen one. Every day she unbearably missed her home, little daughter, usual life, and longed to return to America immediately. George claimed that he tried in every possible way to console and calm his beloved, but he failed. Every day, Julie's depression only deepened. On one of the last days before the disappearance, Scully simply could not stop the flow of tears and rushed to flee from Hellas with all her might. Additionally, the situation was aggravated by the fact that around the same time, the future mother-in-law found out about the existence of her son's fiancé's ex-wife and child. From that moment on, George's mother completely stopped hiding her disdain for her son's chosen one and openly advised him to get rid of this adventuress as soon as possible. On this basis, they had such violent conflicts with their son that the couple was even evicted from the hotel room once. At the same time, George found nothing better than to vent all his anger on Julie. He was jealous of her, forbade her to call relatives, and most importantly, regularly severely beat her. Later, it became known that Skiadopoulos himself most likely inherited mental disorders from his schizophrenic mother. At the very least, the Greek was distinguished by a clearly inflated self-esteem, which with his repulsive appearance, manifested itself in ugly arrogance and selfishness. George demonstrated the talent of a manipulator, as the relatives and friends of the deceased later told, and at the slightest disagreement, he attacked Julie with his fists. By the way, the elder Julia was not the first and not the only victim of the Greek's beating. There is documentary evidence of at least one more of his attacks, once the psychopath almost tore off Scully's arm. However, even then the woman covered for her tormentor, justifying herself to everyone that she was injured by accident. And despite all this horror, she continued to live with the tormentor under the same roof. It was against this eerie background that the events of January 8, 1999 took place. It was then that the couple went on a long car trip to Athens. The road along which the lover's car was winding was practically deserted, a typical section of the Greek outback with 2 lanes and not a soul around. Later, another fierce quarrel broke out between Julie and George. The enraged Skiadopoulos abruptly swerved onto the side of the road and braked in a hiding place where the passengers in the cabin could not be noticed by other road users. Emptiness, silence, and darkness reigned around. The Greek, devoid of human features, jumped out of the car, and a moment later, with an inhuman roar, attacked Julie. Clasping his beloved's neck with his hands, the inhuman man squeezed her throat with inhuman force, seeking only one thing to stifle the cries and pleas of his victim as soon as possible. Later, during interrogation, the killer confessed to the cops that at that fatal moment, he seemed to be watching his own atrocities from the side, unable to control either the situation or himself. According to Skiadopoulos, the sadist simply could not come to his senses in time and let go of Julie while she was still showing at least some signs of life. George assured the investigation that this whole nightmare lasted only a few seconds. However, forensic experts knew well that strangulation requires at least 23 minutes of continuous neck compression. After all he had done, the killer, according to his own testimony, almost lost his mind. At first, he allegedly wanted to burn the mutilated body of his beloved and scatter her ashes over the sea from a cliff, and then jump down himself to reunite with Julie after death. But in the end, he never dared to take this step. However, given the place where George's story took place, the interrogation room, the investigators did not really believe his sweet tales about a suicide attempt. Judging by everything, after the murder, Skiadopoulos did not even think about following his beloved to the other world. At that interrogation, the Greek muttered something about unsuccessful attempts to shoot himself with an air gun, throw himself under the wheels of a truck, and swallow a deadly dose of medicines. But all these masterfully invented plans were never implemented probably. The psychopath was simply afraid, which is why he changed his mind. The reality was much more horrible and eerie. According to the killer's own confession, the first thing he did was shove the bloodless body of his beloved into the trunk of the car, drive to the nearest gas station, fill up a full tank, and return to the scene of the crime. After that, Skiadopoulos dragged the bloody Julie into a field. Away from the road, it was there that 2 small lakes were visible. Without thinking twice, the beast doused the tortured girl with fuel and set her on fire. However, a sudden rain extinguished the fire, so the body was only partially burned. Although George even considered the option of simply drowning the disfigured remains in the nearest lake. In the end, he decided it was better to put the charred corpse back in the trunk. This time, the sadist drove in the opposite direction, to his grandmother's house. There in the pantry, the maniac found a huge suitcase, in which he planned to place Julie's remains. But the so-called rigor mortis stood in the way, as a result of which the tortured body stiffened and did not want to bend. And it was also impossible to shove the dead woman's head into the suitcase, so George took it in cold blood and personally cut Scully's head. Grabbing the severed part by the hair, the killer raised it to the level of his eyes. Later, during interrogation, the Greek confessed to the investigators that at that moment, genuine horror was visible in Julie's dead pupils. However, even after death, the girl seemed incredibly beautiful to him. So as a farewell, the psychopath passionately kissed the bloody lips of his lifeless bride. After these disgusting manipulations, Skiadopoulos packed the mutilated torso into a suitcase, burned it, and threw the charred remains into the middle of the nearest swamp. But George decided to keep Julie's severed head as a creepy trophy. Later, he still got rid of it by throwing it from a high bank into the sea. The girl's body was found only 19 days after her disappearance, and not anywhere else, but at the very place of the murder, where law enforcement officers were brought personally by George, who was already imprisoned at that time. The widow of the deceased, Tim Scully, flew to Greece to identify his wife with his own eyes and settle all the formalities for transporting her mutilated remains to her homeland. But even with this, the terrible story of Julie did not end. A scandal broke out around the case after scandal. For example, George suddenly decided to publicly call himself a murderer, repeating his confession live on Greek television. Upon hearing this, the suspect's mother had a stroke, and his grandmother had an acute nervous breakdown. Meanwhile, Tim's father asked the police in surprise why Skiadopoulos was allowed to live after such a brutal murder. In his opinion, the sadist should have committed suicide immediately after the deed. Instead, frankly cynical publications began to appear in some media outlets, which placed all the blame for the tragedy on the victim herself. However, the official authorities of Greece recognized this crime as almost the most terrible in the country's history. And from the very first days of the process, George's defenders took as a basis the version of the client's insanity, referring to hereditary schizophrenia, which allegedly passed to him from his mother. But despite this, the killer himself begged the court in despair for the highest measure of punishment. True, in Greece, the death penalty is not provided for even the most serious crimes, so theoretically, Skiadopoulos faced a maximum of life imprisonment. While the executioner was fighting for his life, Tim Scully turned out to be the only reliable support for everyone who knew and loved his late wife. Despite the betrayal he experienced, in the most difficult days, the man proved to be an amazingly kind and noble person. It was to Tim that Julie's best friends handed over a diary of memories about her, which their daughter Katie was supposed to read in a few years, and the relatives of the deceased sincerely hoped that the Greek had initially set his sights on Mrs. Scully solely for the money. They say the groom somehow found out about Tim's financial situation, which is why he decided to marry his wife. Perhaps the subsequent judicial division of property was just the main goal of the psychopath. But as soon as George realized that Julie was not going to invest the money obtained from her husband in the Greek's dubious business projects, he immediately brutally dealt with the recalcitrant passion. Be that as it may, the trial of Julie Scully's killer began on November 27, 1999, less than a year after the tragedy. Unlike the USA, Greek legal proceedings do not provide for the participation of a jury in the process. Usually such a case is considered by a panel of 3 professional servants of Themis, which significantly speeds up the course of justice. True, in the case of Skiadopoulos, there was not a single representative of the defense on the witness stand. As a result, the accused gave very lengthy testimony, which lasted about 5 hours, and already on December 6th, the court found 24-year-old George Skiadopoulos guilty on all counts of the indictment. The sadistic killer was sentenced to life imprisonment without the right to early release. But the surprises of Greek justice did not end there. In 2002, the life prisoner filed an appeal against the sentence, stating that at the time of Julia's murder, he was in a state of insanity. This time, the lawyers managed to convince the judges of the validity of their position. Skiadopoulos' life term was replaced by 23 years with the right to apply for parole. Thanks to this decision, already in 2007, the psychopath was released early and returned to his hometown of Kavala. The killer still lives there, surrounded by his new family. It's even scary to imagine whether George's current neighbors and acquaintances have any idea what this imposing man who once cold-bloodedly cut off his own bride's head is capable of.
Youth is a time when people often make rash decisions and mistakes. Sometimes these mistakes can have fatal consequences, especially if a person finds themselves in a toxic relationship. Unfortunately, the situation I'm going to tell you about today ended tragically. This story began in 1992 when 23-year-old single mother Krista, along with her 3-year-old son Joshua, moved to the city of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Almost immediately after the move, Krista got a job as a real estate rental agent in a residential complex. Things were going well, and soon she met 22-year-old Joe, who worked at the fitness center in the same building. A romantic relationship developed between them, and Joe accepted Joshua as his own son. They started living together as a typical American family and later got married. 3 years later, Krista became pregnant. On December 5, 1996, a week before Krista's birthday and a month before Christmas, a baby girl was born, whom they named Lauren. Krista always considered her daughter the best gift for all the Christmas holidays. The family was very close-knit and united, and Lauren's birth brought them even closer together. Grandpa Dusty, Joe's father, paid a lot of attention to his grandchildren and became like a second father to them. However, in 1999, the family faced financial difficulties when Joe lost his job due to downsizing. He couldn't find a new position for a long time, and the family lived on odd jobs. To find stable work, they were forced to move to Phoenix, Arizona. Although the couple perceived this 1,500-kilometer journey as an adventure, it was a serious test for the whole family. They had never seen mountains before, and now they found themselves at their foot, which especially impressed little Lauren. Lauren grew up active and fearless, loved singing, and regularly engaged in sports. At the age of 4, she became passionate about football and loved playing as a goalkeeper. When Lauren went to school, Krista became pregnant with another child, Agee. Even before the baby was born, circumstances changed, and the family decided to return to Oklahoma to be closer to Joe's parents and get the necessary support. It would have been much more difficult to cope with 3 children. Despite the stress and difficulties of the first move, the family again dared to change their place of residence. On October 26, 2002, Krista gave birth to a boy named Dustin in honor of his beloved grandfather. His birthday fell during the Halloween period, which became one of the family's favorite holidays. Every year they arranged themed parties, dressing up as different characters. Lauren, the only girl among the children, became a real daddy's daughter and had an especially close bond with Joe. He even took her hunting with him, where he taught her how to handle weapons and track prey. In February 2005, a 4th child appeared in the family, a boy named Tyler. Lauren spent a lot of time with her younger brothers, sometimes playing with them like dolls, feeding them, changing their clothes, putting them to bed. But she never harmed them, and the little ones got along well with their sister. The family settled in the city of Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, with a population of about 115,000 people. Although it was a relatively small city, it ranked 4th in size in the state. Broken Arrow was known for its low crime rate and was considered the safest city in Oklahoma. However, even this did not protect against the terrible tragedy that happened to the family. 2009 was a turning point in Lauren's life, as a difficult teenage period began. Lauren started having problems associated with puberty, and the situation was further complicated by mental health disorders. Concerned parents took their only daughter for a medical examination, and the doctor diagnosed her with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. This condition affects the ability to concentrate and control certain impulses. Lauren was prescribed medications that were supposed to alleviate the symptoms, but instead, they only worsened the situation. Lauren became withdrawn and quiet, began to distance herself from friends and family. The situation was aggravated by the swine flu epidemic, which, although on a smaller scale, resembled the COVID-19 pandemic. It was at this time that the family's beloved grandfather became infected and died, which was a real shock for all relatives, especially for the children, who were very close to him. This event caused new problems for Lauren, who began to inflict bodily injuries on herself. Up to this point, Krista kept a family video diary full of happy moments. However, from now on, the cheerful and carefree videos were replaced by more gloomy ones. When her daughter began to harm herself, Krista recorded videos for several days in a row, trying to understand if new injuries were appearing. Krista could not figure out what was happening and why her daughter's condition was deteriorating. Lauren withdrew into herself every time the conversation touched on topics that were unpleasant for her and did not make contact. Sometime later, the relatives learned the real reason for the teenager's withdrawal. It turned out that recently Lauren had gotten into a new group of friends. Once she was left alone with an unfamiliar peer who forced her into sexual acts. This had a devastating effect on Lauren's psyche. Lauren did not dare to tell her parents about this, but when the truth was revealed, she managed to get help. Lauren was taken to psychotherapy sessions and was prescribed medication. Over the next few years, Lauren's mental state normalized. She became sociable and friendly again, found new friends. In 2012, Lauren was introduced to a guy named Zach Romaine. They quickly got along and began to spend all their free time together. The teenagers even looked alike. Later, a romantic relationship developed between them. Lauren's family gladly accepted Zach, as he gave the impression of a kind and decent young man. Zach became like an older brother to the younger children in the family. The young people officially announced their relationship in February of the same year, when they both turned 16. Approximately in the middle of the school year, Lauren decided to move in with her boyfriend, leaving her parents' house. They wanted to rent an apartment, get married, and live as a full-fledged independent family. Lauren's parents did not share their daughter's enthusiasm for the idea of living together with Zach, considering them too young for such a serious step. However, they decided not to hinder the girl's independence, fearing to spoil the relationship and provoke a new wave of depression and self-destructive behavior. At the same time, the parents had concerns that because of the relationship, Lauren might neglect her studies. However, the daughter assured them that this would not happen and eventually received their consent. Shortly after the move, Krista, Lauren's mother, suspected that her daughter was pregnant, and this was the reason for the haste in the decision to live together and get married. When asked directly, Lauren replied that she was not sure. Then Krista took her to the hospital for a pregnancy test, which turned out to be positive. Although the news of the early pregnancy came as a surprise to the family, everyone supported Lauren and eagerly awaited the arrival of the child. 19-year-old Lauren gave birth to a daughter, Edison Maine, on March 22, 2015. Zach's parents also enthusiastically received this news, readily accepting the roles of grandmother and grandfather without any condemnation of the young couple. Despite the fears of her relatives, Lauren was able to complete her secondary education a few months after giving birth. And on July 16, 2016, she officially married Zach, after which the couple went on a honeymoon to the city of Branson, Missouri. Outwardly, the couple looked happy, but in reality, Lauren had been struggling with inner demons for years. The emotional wounds she had received in the past continued to cause pain, although not as acutely, which she hinted at in posts on social media pages. At the same time, Lauren was determined to fight for the sake of her loved ones and daughter. Zach got a job to provide for his family, but initially, significant help was provided by the parents on both sides. However, by October 2016, the situation changed. In her posts, Lauren noted how difficult it was for her to constantly be at home alone with the child, complained about the monotony and boredom of everyday life, dreaming of going to work as soon as possible. Despite her boundless love for her daughter, the young mother strived for self-realization and complained about this to her relatives. At the same time, the couple decided to improve their living conditions. They proposed to their old friends Connor Browner and his girlfriend Alexandra Finley to rent a more spacious apartment together, splitting the costs. This would allow them to save money and comfortably accommodate themselves, even with children. Soon the two families moved in together. At first, living together was harmonious and fun. Everyone supported each other, communicated, and spent time together. On May 25, 2017, Lauren finally got a job as a saleswoman in a store, striving for greater independence. At the same time, she continued to struggle with depression, which she told her mother about. Lauren dyed her hair dark, wore black clothes and makeup. The relationship with her husband deteriorated against the background of her general psychological state. The couple of friends with whom they shared the apartment broke up and moved out separately. Zach, Lauren, and their daughter were left alone again and suffered from boredom. After a few months, the marriage began to fall apart. Zach returned to his mother, trying to diffuse the tense atmosphere, but it did not help. The couple could not restore intimacy even for the sake of the child, and the same year they filed for divorce. Interestingly, after the official breakup, The former partners improved their relationship for a while, but not for long. Therefore, they soon dared to make cardinal changes in their personal lives. Left alone with the child, Lauren acutely felt loneliness and a lack of male support. She longed for new love, and it happened quite quickly. Lauren started a relationship with Connor, their former roommate. The shared experience of breaking up with partners brought Lauren and Connor closer, and romantic feelings flared up between them. This news deeply saddened Zach, who still cherished the hope of restoring the family. However, he had to come to terms with the choice of his ex-wife. By September 2017, the divorce procedure was completed. The parents agreed on joint custody of their 2-year-old daughter, taking turns caring for her every week. This decision suited everyone. Zach's hostility towards Connor intensified because of his addiction to illegal substances. Gradually, Lauren also began to smoke marijuana. The apartment increasingly became a place for noisy parties, which the father of little Edison did not like at all. He tried to influence his ex-wife, but in vain. The ground for conflicts between Zach and Lauren, as well as her new partner, arose repeatedly. The girl's parents were shocked to learn that their daughter had exchanged her ex-husband for a guy with a chaotic lifestyle. However, they hoped that over time the youth would calm down and perhaps renew the relationship. But contrary to the expectations of relatives, the situation did not improve. A year passed, and by the fall of 2018, Lauren's life was rapidly going downhill. During this period, she and Connor found themselves surrounded by a company that abused illegal substances. The young couple began to spend more and more time at parties. In addition, Lauren made a new friend, Shanna, an extreme person who often provoked dangerous situations. Lauren's parents were very worried about all these circumstances. It was then that a new profile of Lauren appeared on social networks under the name of one of her alter egos. It was a depressive gothic image in black tones, reflecting the girl's inner state. On the page, she wrote a lot about dissociative identity disorder, a condition in which a person's identity splits, creating the impression that several different personalities coexist in one body. It seems that Lauren herself identified 4 such subpersonalities in herself. On October 26, 2018, Lauren was going to meet with her mother to celebrate her brother's birthday, but instead of a pleasant family time, a serious conversation awaited her. Krista expressed concern about her daughter's lifestyle, but was unable to get through to her. The dialogue turned into a heated argument, after which Lauren turned around, slammed the door, and left. It was the last time her family saw her alive. The next evening, Blake, Lauren's friend, called Krista. He had agreed to give Lauren a ride to a friend's house so that they could prepare together for Halloween, but he could not find her. This alarmed the guy, so he decided to contact her mother. Blake said that the day before in the evening, he met with Lauren and then took her to the nearest gas station. There, Lauren asked to be dropped off, explaining that tattoo artist Mike West was waiting for her. They worked together on the design of a new tattoo, which she planned to get done the same day at his house. According to her friend, he kept in touch with Lauren until the evening. She told him about the details of the tattoo, and then suddenly stopped responding to messages and calls. This surprised Blake, because usually Lauren did not let go of her phone. Upon receiving this information, Krista, Lauren's mother, panicked and wrote to her former son-in-law Zach and her daughter's current boyfriend Connor. Zach confirmed that Lauren never showed up to pick up their daughter, although she planned to do so. This news further alarmed the relatives. Krista was so worried that she immediately turned to law enforcement. The police accepted the missing person report and began an investigation. Unfortunately, in the initial stages of the investigation, the only lead was the testimony of Blake, not a very close acquaintance of Lauren. The detectives collected all the necessary information from the girl's relatives and friends, compiled a detailed description of her appearance and clothing on the day of her disappearance. According to them, Lauren was dressed all in black, a jacket, shirt, jeans, and boots. The police quickly managed to find Mike West, the tattoo artist Blake had mentioned. Mike confirmed that that evening he had picked up Lauren from the gas station and brought her to his home, where they were to finish work on the tattoo sketch before proceeding to apply the design to her body. The man also reported that later, Connor, Lauren's boyfriend, unexpectedly joined them. Lauren assured that everything was fine and asked for permission to leave with him for a short while. However, after that, she never returned, although Mike waited for her all evening. He never saw her again. The next step for the detectives was to talk to Connor, who seemed to be the last person to see Lauren before her disappearance. The guy said that on the day Lauren was getting a tattoo, he drove her in his car to the nearest Walmart supermarket, where she had agreed to meet some friend. After that, Connor allegedly went about his business. According to him, Lauren promised to call as soon as she was free, but she never got in touch. Connor assumed that maybe a friend or someone else then picked her up, so he was not too worried and did not immediately raise the alarm. The investigators noted some discrepancies in Connor's testimony regarding the exact timing of events that day. They decided to check his words more carefully and find out what really happened to Lauren near that supermarket. To do this, the police requested footage from Walmart's surveillance cameras, where Connor had allegedly driven the missing girl. Law enforcement officers received the video materials and began to carefully study them. Meanwhile, the detectives also spoke with the mother of the missing girl, Krista. The woman said that her daughter's relationship with Connor was quite toxic, and at first she was completely against their communication. In recent months, the couple had been quarreling more and more often, and the tension between them was only growing. Krista also reported that at the time of her disappearance, Lauren and Connor had already broken up and were definitely not together on the day he allegedly drove her to the supermarket. Lauren did not want to continue the relationship. She avoided meetings and communication with her ex-boyfriend. Therefore, the mother was very alarmed by the fact that it was Connor who turned out to be the last person to see Lauren before her disappearance. The woman did not hide her hostility towards her daughter's ex-boyfriend, especially because of his addiction to drugs and a tendency to physical abuse. According to Krista, Connor had repeatedly raised his hand against Lauren, which was one of the reasons for their breakup. Therefore, she insisted that the investigators take a close look at him, as she was convinced that the guy was involved in her daughter's disappearance. However, Lauren's ex-husband, Zach, also fell into the circle of suspects. The detectives knew that he was very painfully experiencing the breakup with his wife and was jealous of her new relationship, which many of their mutual acquaintances mentioned. While studying the footage from the surveillance cameras in the Walmart supermarket parking lot, the police could not see Connor's car. There was a possibility that he simply parked in a blind spot, but Lauren was also nowhere to be seen inside the store. The detectives spent many hours diligently reviewing the video recordings, but found no trace of the girl. This could only indicate that she had never been there, which meant that Connor had lied again. More than 48 hours had passed since Lauren's disappearance, a critical period, after which the chances of finding the missing person alive rapidly decrease. Relatives were losing hope more and more. The girl's photos were circulated in the media, and the police urged the public to help in the search for the young mother. Suddenly, an anonymous witness called the police station hotline. He said that on the evening of Lauren's disappearance, he saw Connor arrive at his place in his car. There were noticeable bloodstains on the seats and floor mats in the cabin, which the guy tried to hide by throwing covers on top, but this did not completely mask them. When the informant was asked about the origin of the stains, Connor allegedly replied that he had recently hit a dog on the road. He claimed that he was forced to transport the injured animal in the cabin to deliver it to the nearest vet clinic, which is why everything was covered in blood. But in the witness's opinion, there was way too much blood for such an explanation. The anonymous person admitted that at the time, he did not know about the disappearance of Connor's girlfriend, so he did not immediately attach importance to this incident and did not contact the police. However, after hearing the news, he decided to report this suspicious information to the investigators. Upon receiving such information, the detectives began to consider Connor as the main suspect in the case. They decided to take a closer look at his biography and past. It turned out that the guy had already had problems with the law, in particular due to a minor domestic quarrel. In addition, during the arrest, he resisted the police officers. And less than a year before breaking up with Lauren, a serious fight occurred between them, during which Lauren called law enforcement. True, Lauren then decided not to press charges, so the conflict was hushed up. The detectives also found out that at the time of his ex-girlfriend's disappearance, Connor was already dating someone else. It seemed that Lauren's fate did not concern him at all. However, the investigators still summoned him for questioning to ask a few questions. This time, Connor changed his previous testimony. According to his new version, that day he took Lauren to Walmart so that she could buy needles for syringes there, Allegedly, this was needed for injections of narcotic substances that Lauren planned to use after the tattoo session. Connor claimed that he was initially against this idea, but could not persuade Lauren. After that, he allegedly just went about his business, no longer saw her, and does not know what happened next. Such discrepancies in the testimony only heightened the suspicions of the investigators. Frequent changes in Connor's statements, new details that appeared in his stories, all indicated that the guy was clearly hiding something. Moreover, the surveillance cameras did not record either his car or Lauren near the supermarket, and store employees also could not remember the girl. To track the suspect's movements, the police obtained access to his mobile phone data. It turned out that Connor was indeed near Walmart that evening, but much later than he had previously stated, around 10 p.m. While studying the surveillance camera footage, the detectives noticed that Connor did come to the supermarket that evening, but he was there with another girl, who later turned out to be his ex, Alexandra Finley, with whom they had previously rented a place together. In the video, the couple was carefreely strolling through the store, buying up for Halloween. But among their purchases, a large number of cleaning products especially caught the attention of the police officers. This fact seemed very suspicious given the experience of the investigators. The detectives decided to talk to Alexandra about those purchases. Alexandra confirmed that evening, Connor called and asked her to help with cleaning the car. He told a story about a quarrel between two of his acquaintances that took place in the car's cabin. Allegedly, one of them was wounded, abundantly covering everything with blood. Then Connor took the injured person to the hospital, portraying himself as a hero. That is why the guy urgently needed cleaning products to clean the cabin, and he called his ex-girlfriend for help. Alexandra believed this strange story and agreed to go to the store with Connor, and later helped him wipe off the dried blood stains from the upholstery and carpets. Having obtained a search warrant, the police were able to thoroughly inspect the main suspect's car. In the cabin, they found numerous traces of blood that someone had tried hard to remove. At that moment, no one had any doubts that this blood belonged to the missing Lauren. Judging by everything, Lauren had lost a lot of blood, so it was not possible to completely get rid of the stains. Experts who examined the scene concluded that the victim had suffered a severe injury and most likely died as a result of massive blood loss. Investigators carefully collected samples of biological material and sent them for examination. The results of laboratory tests later confirmed the worst fears the blood found did indeed belong to the missing Lauren. When Connor was presented with this evidence, he once again changed his testimony. This time, the suspect claimed that he had picked up Lauren from the supermarket, but there was some girl with her who allegedly wanted to buy narcotic substances from a friend. Something went wrong, and that person suddenly pulled out a gun and shot Lauren in the head. Instead of fleeing the crime scene, the killer allegedly pointed the weapon at Connor and ordered him to drive to the nearest place where the body could be disposed of. The guy drove a little further, and at the direction of the armed stranger, threw the dead Lauren into a dumpster. At the same time, Connor insisted on his non-involvement and innocence. This version of events sounded just as implausible and confused as the previous ones. Moreover, it was extremely disappointing because the garbage in that area was regularly taken out. When the police arrived at the scene, the containers were already empty. However, traces of blood were found at the site, which most likely belonged to Lauren as well as her bracelet. These samples were also sent for examination. The examination later confirmed that the blood found was the blood of the missing girl. On November 5, 2018, the investigators tried to obtain a confession from Connor. The police did not believe the story about some drug dealer who allegedly shot Lauren. In the end, they managed to break the suspect, and he confessed that on that fateful evening, he had a conflict with Lauren in the car. Lauren refused to get out of the cabin. The annoyed ex-boyfriend pulled out a gun to scare her. However, according to him, the magazine accidentally fell out. As he bent down to pick it up, Connor unintentionally pulled the trigger. A shot rang out, and the bullet hit Lauren right in the face. However, the police did not believe that it was an accident. Their doubts about the truthfulness of Connor's testimony only intensified. But be that as it may, thanks to the persistent work of law enforcement officers, they managed to obtain a confession from the suspect about what he had done. The 22-year-old killer was arrested and placed in the Tulsa County Jail. The next task was to find Lauren's body. According to the detainee's testimony, He threw it into a container for paper waste and even indicated a specific place. This was confirmed by the GPS tracker data of his car. The very next day, a garbage truck took the contents of that container to the nearest landfill. Now the police needed to find out which landfill it was taken to and find the body as soon as possible before it disappeared without a trace among the giant waste dumps. After reviewing the surveillance camera footage, the investigators were able to identify the truck that emptied the ill-fated container. The police department sent a whole group of 30 employees to inspect 72 sorting points that served 19 waste recycling enterprises in 16 states. There was little time for the search. The detectives familiarized themselves with all the stages of the waste paper recycling process. It included several technological operations during which the body could be crushed into small parts. Theoretically, there were several points where the remains could still be found, but the probability of this was extremely small, since the processing lines were maximally automated and few people worked there. With each hour of fruitless searches, the police more and more clearly realized that Lauren's remains had most likely already gone through the entire recycling cycle. However, it was impossible to stop. It was extremely important to find the body in order to study the injuries in detail and compare them with Connor's version. To facilitate this extremely difficult task, it was decided to send dog handlers with service dogs trained to search for corpses by the characteristic smell of decomposition to the enterprises. This is what gave the result. After some time, the dogs were able to find what was left of the once beautiful young woman, fragments of skin, bones, and internal organs, ground by the processing equipment. DNA expertise officially confirmed that the remains found belonged to the missing Lauren. The recycling company immediately recalled 30 tons of paper produced the day before to avoid human body parts getting into the final product. Lauren's grief-stricken mother, upon learning the terrible truth about her daughter's death, tearfully told the police that she remembers their last meeting with pain in her heart. They parted after an argument, and now Krista will never be able to hug her baby girl and apologize to her. The woman admitted that she immediately felt uneasy about Lauren's relationship with Connor and repeatedly warned her daughter that the guy would bring her nothing but grief. Unfortunately, her fears came true. Even after the breakup, the problems did not stop. Krista had to call Lauren's ex-boyfriend several times and threatened to call the police, demanding that he stop pursuing the girl. But despite all the mother's efforts to protect her daughter, this horrible story still ended in tragedy. Krista could not contain her indignation at how cruelly Connor treated her child, throwing her body in the trash like garbage. At the same time, in their town, there were people who supported the killer. Some remembered him as an ordinary guy with whom they grew up side by side. No one justified what he had done, but some suggested that the murder could have been unintentional, accidental. Meanwhile, a thorough search was conducted in Connor's apartment. A gun was found in the trash can. All the evidence collected made it possible to reconstruct in detail the chain of events that led to Lauren's death. According to the prosecution, Connor lured his ex-girlfriend out of the tattoo artist's house, and already in the car, a conflict broke out between them. After a verbal altercation, the enraged guy took out a weapon and shot Lauren, and then threw her body into a dumpster. Afterward, the killer sat down to clean the bloodied car cabin as if nothing had happened, and then he carefreely went to work and in the evening went to meet with friends. In January 2020, the case went to court. Connor never admitted his guilt, despite the obviousness of the evidence provided by the prosecution. He was sure that the jury would find him guilty of manslaughter at most. However, the prosecution was just about to present the main trumps that proved the intentional nature of the crime. The lawyers insisted that the fatal shot was fired by accident, but the prosecutors announced the results of the analysis of the correspondence from the defendant's phone. It turned out that the breakup with Lauren was preceded by the beginning of Connor's relationship with another girl. In messages to his mistresses, the guy spoke extremely negatively about his ex, calling her a parasite. He blamed Lauren for allegedly ruining his life and not leaving him alone. In the same correspondence, Connor admitted that he was ready to do anything to get rid of the annoying ex-girlfriend, even murder. But these statements contradicted the testimony of the victim's mother, who claimed that everything was exactly the opposite. It was Connor who could not come to terms with the breakup and was pursuing her daughter everywhere. Unable to let Lauren go, he decided that if Lauren would not be with him, she would not be with anyone. Having considered all the circumstances of the case, the jury found the defendant guilty of premeditated murder. 23-year-old Connor Branner was sentenced to life imprisonment. However, after 38 years and 3 months, he will have the right to petition for parole. After the verdict was announced, the mother of the deceased, Krista, said that she would not forgive the killer of her daughter. She also added, "We will never be able to come to terms with this loss. We have no one to bury. We don't even have a grave where we could come and remember Lauren." In January of 2014, the family of a successful entrepreneur named Harold Saska suddenly lost all contact with the head of their household. Investigators gradually uncovered shocking details surrounding Harold's death. The circumstances of the incident turned out to be so horrific and repugnant that questions still arise as to whether the perpetrator's punishment was severe enough. At the same time, it raises the question of whether Harold himself may have had hidden negative character traits that could have led to what happened to him. This crime is so cynical that it even became the basis for writing a book. One of the main figures in this case was 19-year-old Sarah McLinn, a charming and sociable girl. Before the tragedy occurred, she lived with her employer, Harold Saska. Relatives described him as a successful businessman with a difficult personality. He was quite impulsive and always sought to dominate in relationships with anyone. Sometimes Harold could seem rather rude, but according to his loved ones, he by no means deserved the fate that befell him. These events took place in the small city of Lawrence, Kansas, USA, with a population of less than 100,000 people. On January 17, 2014, a young man who lived near the Lawrence College campus came to the local police station. It was a very safe and comfortable area to live in, with a low crime rate. Of course, conflicts sometimes occurred here, but they were usually minor altercations between students that were quickly resolved without serious consequences. When the young man arrived at the police station, the officers initially assumed that it was some insignificant incident. The guy reported that he had heard suspicious and frightening sounds coming from his upstairs neighbor's apartment. He believed that something terrible might have happened there. The law enforcement officers decided to check this information and responded to the call quite promptly. By that time, it was already around 11:00 p.m. No one answered the knocks on the door, but there were strong reasons to believe that something bad had happened inside. The police then began to survey the area. It turned out that the back door was locked. Next, the officers looked through the windows, shining flashlights into the rooms, trying to understand what had occurred inside. In one of the windows, they saw something that turned a routine check into an investigation of a serious crime. The police noticed an unconscious man lying on the floor. When they entered the apartment, they recognized him as Harold. He was lying in a pool of dried blood. Harold's throat was cut so deeply that his head was barely attached to his body. This was clearly not just a crime, but a murder committed with extreme brutality. The local police had never encountered such gruesome crimes before and were shocked by the scene they witnessed and the amount of blood in the apartment. No one could understand who could have committed such a heinous act. Investigators quickly found out that during this period, a 19-year-old student named Sarah McLinn was living with Harold. However, there was no trace of the girl in the house. There was a possibility that she had become the second victim of an unknown psychopath who broke into the apartment and brutally killed the man. Sarah should have been the last person to see Harold alive. What could have happened to the girl was anyone's guess. Numerous witnesses and acquaintances claimed that for Sarah, Harold was a role model and a mentor in life. She saw the best qualities in him: understanding and a desire to help, something she lacked so much from her biological father. The girl had serious problems with her parents at home, who could barely find common ground due to the family breakdown. Sarah moved in with Harold after entering college, and despite the significant age difference, they became friends. On the morning of the same day that the businessman's body was found, Sarah's biological father went to the police and reported her missing. This happened much earlier than when the other student called the police, but the officers never arrived at the scene. Sarah's father reported that he regularly communicated with his daughter by phone, but she had not answered his calls for a day already. This was very unlike Sarah, so her father decided to report the young girl missing. Often the police do not pay attention to such reports or delay the investigation, since teenagers frequently run away from home to have fun or due to family problems, and then return. But this case was clearly different, because Sarah could have become the second victim of a brutal crime. Therefore, it was crucial to find the 19-year-old girl as soon as possible and act swiftly. Sarah McLinn was born in 1994 in the city of Topeka, the administrative center of the state of Kansas. She was an ordinary child, cheerful, friendly, and charming. Sarah had an attractive appearance and long dark hair. From a young age, the girl was interested in many things and had a wide range of hobbies. By her parents' decision, she was homeschooled. However, not everything in Sarah's life was cloudless. The girl suffered harassment from a neighbor, which left her with a psychological trauma. Adolescence brought Sarah the typical difficulties of this period. The situation was further complicated by the fact that there was a tense atmosphere in the girl's family. When Sarah was 16, her parents decided to divorce. This was followed by conflicts and disputes related to the division of joint property. During that period, Sarah became a victim of violence by a guy she knew. In addition, the neighbor continued to harass her, so the girl was afraid to be at home more than necessary. In an attempt to escape from her problems, Sarah began to drink alcohol and date various guys in search of love. But in the end, nothing helped, and she had a nervous breakdown. Sarah even tried to take her own life, which landed her in the hospital. Sarah underwent treatment in a psychiatric clinic. After being discharged, she continued to take prescribed medications. Harold Saska was born in 1961. He always stood out for his extraordinary activity and worked virtually around the clock. The man dreamed of building his own business and getting rich, so he started working at the age of 14, which later yielded results. For a long time, Harold held the position of administrator in restaurants, which allowed him to master management skills and practice, accumulate funds, and gain experience to start his own business. He transformed this invaluable experience into ownership of 3 franchise pizzerias in the cities of Topeka and Lawrence. Harold had been managing the restaurant business long before he met Sarah. Despite being an entrepreneur, Harold remained quite simple in communication. He often participated in various community events and also gave out pizza for free during important church services. He was also a mentor for young people. It was through this program that Harold met Sarah, who started working at one of his restaurants in Topeka. When the girl turned 14, she was already taking orders at the counter. At that time, she was already attracting the attention of the business owner, who constantly complimented her. But Sarah ignored them. By the age of 17, Sarah began saving money to move out from her parents. Sarah realized that she would not be able to become independent and achieve her goals while remaining in the toxic atmosphere of her parents' home. During this period, her mother and father often argued about the upcoming division of property. In any case, the earnings from the restaurant were not enough for Sarah to rent a separate apartment. At this time, she grew closer to her boss and openly told Harold about her life problems. Thanks to the mentoring program, he became like a second father to her. At the same time, Sarah felt that her biological father did not love her. The girl's problems did not leave the restaurant manager indifferent, and Harold offered her to move in with him. Given that Sarah had nowhere to go, but she desperately wanted to solve her problems at home, Sarah agreed to his proposal and after some time decided to move. The only person who expressed concern about this situation was Sarah's mother. They often discussed the upcoming move with her daughter. The woman was suspicious of this idea, suspecting something wrong. But Sarah was adamant. She could no longer stay in her parents' house and endure constant quarrels. Eventually, immediately after entering college, Sarah moved in with her mentor. They both viewed it as a temporary measure and a kind of cohabitation that would not last long. Harold believed that in this way he could help the girl study in college. The man paid for her education and supported her. Several months passed, during which they grew closer and became good friends. Later, they moved together to another house in the suburbs, where the mentorship continued. Until in July of 2014, this cozy house in a quiet residential area became the scene of a brutal murder. The fact that a 19-year-old girl was living with a 52-year-old man as friends already raised many questions. This circumstance surprised the investigators. Initially, the detectives assumed that Sarah could have been the victim of an attack, just like her mentor. Her parents were worried because she did not respond to attempts to contact her. There was a possibility that Sarah had been taken hostage and faced an unenviable fate if the police could not quickly find the perpetrator.
I want to let her know that we love her and want her to come home.
Forensic experts were shocked by the brutality of the attack on the businessman. It appeared that the motive for the crime was personal. The victim's hands were tied behind his back, and then his throat was slit. Analysis of the blood traces found showed that they all belonged to the deceased. Probably Sarah was not injured during the attack, but then it could indicate her abduction. Other versions were also considered in parallel. During the searches, detectives noticed the disappearance of many valuable items. It resembled a robbery. Most of the items were scattered from the closets, as if the perpetrator was looking for valuables. As a result, the criminal stole money and firearms that Harold kept for self-defense. After taking inventory of the stolen items, the detectives realized that almost all of the girls' personal belongings had disappeared from the house. They were clearly gathered in a hurry. However, Sarah's car remained in place. In addition, her mobile phone and tablet were lying on the kitchen table. Given that Sarah was left without means of communication, investigators increasingly leaned towards the idea of her abduction. Otherwise, she would not have left her phone and car behind. However, the strangest find discovered by law enforcement was letters on the floor. Some word was written in Harold's blood. It was probably a message, but it was smeared, so it was impossible to read the inscription. The only lead the investigators had was the license plate number of the victim's car, which had also disappeared from the crime scene. The number was checked in the database, and the police began an active search for the vehicle. They reviewed all the footage from surveillance cameras where this vehicle could have been recorded. Soon it was spotted on a recording from a toll booth located on the way to Texas. However, the video quality was very poor. The detectives saw a person behind the wheel, but it was impossible to determine who it was. Even the driver's gender remained a mystery. It was clear that the car was heading south, so the police began checking other cameras that could have captured it along this route. However, no new information could be obtained. The sheriff of the precinct contacted all the posts that the stolen car could have passed, but it was quiet everywhere. While the detectives were waiting for new information, they began interviewing the missing girls' friends and acquaintances. The investigators sought to get an idea of these people's personalities and find out the true nature of the relationship between Sarah and the 52-year-old murder victim. The police suspected that their relationship might go beyond ordinary mentorship and friendly cohabitation. However, no evidence of an intimate relationship or anything similar could be found. No one had ever noticed them behaving like a couple in love, although some people had such suspicions. Even in the house where Sarah and Harold lived, the girl had her own separate room and bedroom. It seemed that the man had indeed become a mentor and, to some extent, a father figure to his employee. This was entirely consistent with the image of a virtuous Samaritan, which was portrayed by numerous friends and acquaintances of Harold. The police even found confirmation of this in one of Sarah's social media posts, where she was pictured together with Harold. Sarah referred to him as Dad. Colleagues at work also did not notice any signs of a romantic relationship between the persons involved in the case. They described Harold as energetic and extremely purposeful. The entire business rested on him, and he also enjoyed helping those in need.
He helped everybody. He was to help everybody, and in fact, he was helping Sarah.
Anybody, he would pick you up off the street. If you needed somewhere to stay, he'd give you money if you were hungry. He was just really kind.
However, some characterized him as a pervert who was attracted to young girls. Therefore, they assumed that the real reason for inviting Sarah to live with him was the desire to engage in an intimate relationship with her. Sarah, for her part, was described as a diligent, nice, and smart girl. She gave the impression of a somewhat shy person. She did not have many close friends. Sarah compensated for most of her communication through activity on social networks. No criminal past was found for either of the pair. Despite interviewing dozens of people, the police did not make any progress in the investigation. Sarah's whereabouts and fate remained unknown. Meanwhile, the critical 48-hour period, during which the chances of finding a crime victim alive were highest, was rapidly running out. Soon, the missing girl's relatives received a call from an unknown person from Texas. He did not say anything specific and simply hung up after a few seconds. Fortunately, the police managed to track the location from which the suspicious call was made. It was assumed that Sarah's kidnapper was the one who called. It was a gas station near the town of Bish, Texas. The call was made from a 24-hour store, so investigators were able to obtain footage from surveillance cameras as soon as they arrived at the scene. The video showed Sarah entering the store and dialing a number on her mobile phone. However, she did not say anything and ended the call a few seconds after her parents answered. Then she calmly made a purchase, paid for gas, got into the car, and drove away. This event raised new suspicions among the police. The girl closely resembled Sarah in appearance. If we assume that she was a victim of abduction, then why did she enter the store alone, without any coercion, and behave completely at ease, as if no one was forcibly holding her? Could it be that Sarah was not a victim but a murderer who was trying to escape? A week passed, during which no news came. Sarah had literally disappeared from all radars, but late in the evening of January 25, 2014, one of the police officers on patrol in the Everglades area of Florida noticed a suspicious car parked on the side of the road while inspecting his precinct.
They say from Lawrence, she then went somewhere into Texas and eventually crossed over into Florida, where she was found Saturday at the Everglades National Park.
Stopping was prohibited in this place, so the officer decided to check the vehicle. In the back seat of the car, he found a girl sleeping, curled up. The patrol officer noticed a large number of empty water bottles in the car. It seemed that Sarah had been here for quite a long time and was actually living in the car. The policeman tapped on the window, waking the girl up. He told her that she must leave this place immediately. After that, as a precautionary measure, the patrol officer checked the car's license plate number in the database. It turned out that the car was wanted and belonged to Harold Saska. The officer ordered the girl to get out of the vehicle, detained her, and sent her to the state of Kansas. The vehicle was immediately seized and sent for examination. During a search inside the car, a large knife with stains resembling blood, a gun, and an axe were found. After conducting analyses, forensic experts concluded that it was this knife that had been used to slit the throat of the 52-year-old businessman. But what could have prompted someone to deal so brutally with a person who was their mentor and in many ways replaced a biological father? In this rather strange tandem, it was Sarah who aroused more suspicion. She came from a troubled family. Despite her good manners and politeness, Sarah had long been considered a difficult teenager. During interrogation at the police station, Sarah confessed that the reason for the tragedy was the events that occurred after she began living with Harold. According to Sarah, at first everything was wonderful. Harold took care of her like a father. The man asked Sarah to call him dad in public, and he told everyone that Sarah was his stepdaughter so that their cohabitation would not raise unnecessary questions for anyone. But later, the man began to make indecent proposals to the girl and harass her. For some time, Sarah managed to avoid these conversations, but Harold became more and more persistent and aggressive. He no longer just hinted at an intimate relationship, but openly demanded it from the girl. The man began to reproach Sarah for investing a lot in her, and now she was supposedly obliged to sleep with him. To make more of an impression, Harold made a long list of his expenses on the girl and constantly threw it in her face. The list included, in particular, 2 plastic surgeries that the man himself insisted on, rhinoplasty and gluteoplasty, designed to correct Sarah's appearance according to his ideas of perfection. Harold also demanded that Sarah undergo breast augmentation surgery, humiliated her by saying that she had a mediocre appearance and no one would ever love her like that. This awakened Sarah's insecurities. Sarah became increasingly constrained and withdrawn. During that period, Harold began giving her alcohol and illegal substances, and when Sarah was high, he coerced her into sexual intimacy. Later, Sarah began to engage in intimate relations with him even without doping, only under his coercion, so as not to anger the man. Due to the constant pressure that Harold exerted on her, Sarah felt like a victim. She was afraid to even go to her parents, feared condemnation, so she continued to endure it all. And Harold continued to threaten her with a lawsuit to recover his expenses. Sometimes Sarah did not go to work because she was ashamed. She would lie on the couch all day, drink, and think about how to break out of this vicious circle. But nothing sensible came to mind. Sarah was morally crushed. She saw the only way out of this situation in killing her abuser. So she eventually went and committed the crime to free herself. On that fateful day, January 14, 2014, Harold returned home and started working on the sound system. He asked Sarah to bring him a beer, and Sarah fulfilled the request. However, she slipped a few sleeping pills into the drink, which she had purchased a few days before the planned massacre. When Harold passed out, Sarah tied his hands to secure herself. Now she had complete control over his body. Sarah described the gruesome details of the crime she committed in an absolutely calm and extremely detailed manner. Having immobilized her victim, Sarah felt for Harold's pulse on his neck, trying to sense how the blood was flowing through his veins. It seemed to give her strength. Sarah went to the kitchen and took a large knife. Sarah plunged the blade into the victim's neck and fell into a frenzy, trying to cut off his head. She literally could not stop. At one point, the thought flashed through the girl's mind to abandon her intention to kill Harold, but she could no longer restrain herself and decided to follow through with it. The police also tried to clarify some strange circumstances found at the crime scene. In particular, they were interested in what was written in blood and why it was later erased. Sarah explained that after the murder, she wrote the word freedom in blood, which then accidentally got smeared. The suspect claimed that she had to break free. That was how she marked the purpose of this crime. Having finished dealing with Harold, Sarah washed up and changed her clothes. She confirmed that she had intentionally left her phone and tablet in the kitchen to avoid the possibility of being tracked. Instead, Sarah stole another mobile phone. It was from this phone that she called her relatives from the gas station. Before fleeing, Sarah gathered her personal belongings, everything that could come in handy on the road. The girl drove as far as she could, then stopped in a deserted place and spent several days there, sleeping in the car, eating fast food, and pondering her next steps. But eventually, Sarah began to be tormented by her conscience. She felt bad and fell into despair. At the time she was found, Sarah was in a pitiful state. During the interrogation, Sarah also admitted that she wanted to see someone die. Law enforcement officers latched onto this phrase and dismissed the version that Sarah herself was a victim of violence.
Well, simply put, we believe that the facts of this case, once they're revealed in the courtroom, will be evidence of that heinous, atrocious, and cruel offense that Kansas legislature has decided is warranted for a crime of this nature, that a higher penalty is appropriate.
Instead, they concluded that they were dealing with a psychopath obsessed with the idea of murder. On January 17, 2015, Sarah McLinn was officially charged with premeditated murder. The hearings took place in the District Court of Lawrence. Numerous people came to the girl's defense, assuring that she had never shown any inclination to violence or cruelty.
Many survivors go to prison because they aren't afforded the same consideration that we see being granted in stand your ground situations.
But the question is, why? And what was going on in that house? And the hearing process that we had really didn't get to that. There are lots of women at TCF in Sarah's situation.
However, the prosecution had a different opinion. A large amount of evidence was collected that literally indisputably pointed to Sarah's guilt. She was found in the victim's car, where a bloody knife with 2 types of DNA was also discovered, the blood of the murdered man on the blade, and Sarah's fingerprints on the handle. During the very first interrogation, the girl gave a confession and did not retract it until the start of the court hearings. Given the exceptional brutality of the crime, the prosecutors insisted on life imprisonment for the young defendant. It only remained to convince the jury of this. Sarah's lawyer decided to build the line of defense on the basis of her insanity. He considered such tactics to be the most advantageous, so in court, he insisted that Sarah was mentally ill and needed treatment, not punishment. The defense claimed that the accused had mental disorders, for which she was taking prescription drugs. But approximately a year before the crime, a doctor had prescribed Sarah new medications that had a devastating effect on her mental state. The girl began to have bouts of aggression, she periodically fell into a rage, and cruel thoughts haunted her. All this led to the emergence of Sarah's obsessive idea to kill someone. For a long time, Sarah struggled with this side effect of medications and her illness, hoping that the obsessive thoughts would pass. She was sure that if she did commit murder, she would no longer be able to stop. However, the I'd fix would not let her go. Sometimes it seemed to Sarah that by taking someone's life, she would feel a surge of new strength. This thought inspired the girl. Eventually, she became curious to find out what feelings she would have after killing a person. However, according to the lawyer, the murder was committed in the heat of passion, impulsively. The defendant simply could not cope with the sudden outburst of emotions that seized her. The prosecution, on the other hand, believed that despite her mental problems, Sarah had a clear plan of action for the murder and was fully aware of her actions. To support this version, the fact was presented that Sarah had made online inquiries about injuries to the neck area. She was looking for information on how to inflict knife wounds more effectively and was searching for a victim for her cruel intentions. Shortly before the murder, the businessman had fallen into depression. Harold complained about his depressed state and even made remarks about wanting to voluntarily end his life. Probably, that's why Sarah chose him as her victim. Perhaps Sarah decided to help her mentor and carry out what he had intended instead of him. Sarah knew exactly how to act, so a few hours before the crime, she took the medications prescribed to her. This was supposed to awaken anger and bloodlust in her. At the same time, she gave Harold a sleeping pill and waited for him to fall into a slumber from which he would never wake up. According to the prosecutor, the planning and preparation for the murder refuted the version of the defendant's insanity, and therefore her place was behind bars. The defense, in turn, had its own arguments. The lawyer insisted that Sarah suffered from multiple personality disorder. She was found to have at least a few alter egos that developed as a result of dissociative identity disorder. This is a mental phenomenon in which a person behaves as if they possess two or more different personalities or ego states. These subpersonalities emerged as a defense mechanism of the psyche in response to the difficult life circumstances in which Sarah found herself as a teenager. In view of this, the lawyer considered Sarah insane and insisted on the need to send her for psychiatric treatment. At the same time, the psychiatrist who worked with her while awaiting the trial said that such deviations could manifest in young people against the background of traumatic events. Sarah fell into the 7% of confirmed diagnoses that are identified during research. It was believed that the first prerequisites for the tragedy appeared back in adolescence, when she was coerced into intimacy through violence. Against this background, new personalities emerged in her. One of them was called Vanessa. Like Sarah, she was very timid and frightened. The diametrically opposite personality was Alice, very cruel and aggressive, always expecting foul play and ready to act to protect all the other alter egos. While communicating with psychiatrists in prison, Sarah made another statement. She spoke about the violence of an intimate nature committed against her by the murdered man. The man had literally arranged her life. He gave her a pretty good salary, a roof over her head, and was indeed a valuable mentor while demanding intimacy. However, Sarah felt trapped because of this. According to her, she got involved with this man to solve her life problems, but instead acquired new ones that she could not cope with. She felt that he was using her. During this period, her personalities began to conflict. Vanessa wanted to commit suicide, but Alice transformed this thought in the exact opposite way. Instead of wanting to kill herself, she wanted to bring death to others. This was what the distorted defense mechanism looked like, associated with the girl's mental deviations and repeatedly amplified by the new drug prescribed by the doctor. After that, Sarah decided to commit the crime. At this time, Alice, who was killing Harold, gained full control over her body. Having thoroughly enjoyed control over the victim, she slit his throat in the most brutal way. While the execution was taking place, all of Sarah's modest personalities faded into the background, literally becoming outside observers. It is worth noting that many more alter egos coexisted in her than the couple mentioned, but only Alice among them was cruel and truly evil. According to Sarah, her kinder personalities tried to stop Alice, but they failed to do so. In any case, the criminal's lawyer believed that she should not be put in prison. In the defense's opinion, Sarah was insane and desperately needed treatment for her illnesses. The defendant could not even be present at some of the hearings, according to the defense, due to an exacerbation of mental problems. The lawyer was outraged that Sarah had given a confession during the first interrogation. According to psychiatrists, it was unknown which alter ego was in control of the body at that moment. The accused's different personalities gave different testimonies. Only Alice claimed that Harold had harassed her. The rest denied it. In any case, the investigation managed to find evidence of violence by Harold. He wrote about this in messages to Sarah, but it was all ignored. The prosecution concluded its speech by pointing out two indisputable facts. First, Harold was dead. Second, Sarah was definitely the killer. Naturally, she tried to portray herself as a victim, But the real victim was already buried. The defense continued to insist that Sarah suffered from serious mental problems and was also subjected to sexual violence and harassment by the murdered man. After that, the jury retired to deliberate on the verdict. Sarah arrived at the sentencing in a rather adequate state. She managed to pull herself together. She burst into tears when she saw the Saska family. It seemed that she was ashamed of what had happened, so she asked them for forgiveness. The jury decided that Sarah was guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 50 years. The jurors emphasized that it was a planned crime. In May of 2021, Sarah's case was reconsidered. Her sentence was reduced to 25 years. Sarah is still serving her sentence in the Topeka Correctional Facility in Kansas. The earliest date she can be released from prison is 2039. Share your thoughts about this story in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe.
Communications.
Hi there, how are you?
Good, you?
Good, thanks. I'm a plumber and I'm on site for a job, and we're snaking a drain, and we've been pulling back. We probably pulled back about 10 pounds, 15 pounds of it looks like flesh type of stuff, meat, and we started to snake, and we've been working at it for 3-4 hours now, right?
Oh, okay.
And we can't get it clear, but we keep pulling back chunks of whatever the hell it is.
This emergency 911 call takes us back to the events of December 29, 2017, which took place in an apartment on McLinn Drive in Oshawa, Ontario, Canada. The caller, a plumber named Sean Faradan, made a chilling discovery: pieces of human flesh clogging the sewer pipes. Further investigation led law enforcement to the doorstep of 45-year-old Adam Strong, who lived in the apartment below. To everyone's great surprise, Strong immediately confessed that he was storing human remains in his freezer. But this was just the tip of the iceberg in this complex and horrifying story. The roots of this tragedy run much deeper and require careful examination to determine to whom these remains belonged and how they ended up in the bathroom sewer. The year 2017 brought a horrific crime to the city of Oshawa that shook the entire country. On September 11th, a disturbing discovery was made in Lake Ontario near the shore of Oshawa. A 5-year-old boy fishing with his grandfather spotted human torsos in the water. Law enforcement immediately arrived at the scene, retrieved the remains from the water, and launched an investigation. Despite extensive searches involving divers, no other body parts were found. The autopsy showed that the torsos belonged to a woman, but the exact cause of death could not be determined. However, the nature of the injuries indicated a violent death. The absence of the head made it extremely difficult to identify the victim, so DNA analysis was the only way. And only on November 9, 2017, 2 months after the terrible discovery, the bitter truth was revealed. The torsos belonged to 18-year-old Rori Hache, a pregnant Oshawa resident who had gone missing at the end of August of the same year. Rori Hache was born on July 9, 1999, and was the favorite of her mother, Shannon Dion. Little is known about her father, but some of the girl's relatives had a reputation for living a reckless lifestyle. Her grandfather, Bernard, a former biker, gangster, and boxer, was widely known as the founder and leader of the motorcycle club Satan's Choice. Rori's uncle, Harley, also belonged to the motorcycle club Hell's Angels. But despite these family ties, Rori's childhood was fairly quiet. She was described as a kind and smart girl. In addition to her mother, Rori had a very close relationship with her godmother and Shannon's best friend, Christy Melnick. In the lower grades, Rori excelled in her studies, and at the age of 13, she even received the prestigious title of Cadet of the Year in the local unit. But everything changed for the worse in the first year of high school, when someone introduced her to drugs, which led to addiction. The next years of Rori's life were filled with turbulence, and drugs became an integral part of her existence. In an attempt to finance her addiction, she resorted to prostitution, causing even more suffering for her mother. Shannon, in desperation, turned to Child Protective Services for help, hoping to save her daughter. Fortunately, in early 2017, Shannon's efforts paid off. Rori finally began to take steps to change her life. She found a job, returned to school, and seemed to find stability by moving in with her boyfriend, Tony. Despite all the hardships, Rori was determined to start a new chapter in her life. In August 2017, Rori told her mother about her pregnancy. She firmly decided to have the baby, and Shannon supported her decision. But the mother had no idea that her daughter had started using drugs again. On August 28th, near the shopping center, Rori met with Constable Christopher Kane. He had been watching the girl for a long time and was trying in every way to involve social services to help her overcome her addiction. During the conversation, Rori admitted that she was using drugs again and was engaged in prostitution to get money for a fix. Concerned about Rori's fate, Constable Kane decided to contact the appropriate services, but when he returned, the girl had already disappeared. On August 29, 2017, the day after meeting with the constable, a friend of her mother brought Rori to the hospital after an exacerbation of a mental disorder. Unfortunately, for unknown reasons, they were unable to stay with her and left after a few minutes, leaving Rori alone. Remarkably, just 15 minutes later, she decided to leave the hospital without waiting for the necessary medical care. Surveillance cameras captured Rori calmly leaving the building. This was the last confirmation that the girl was still alive. From that moment on, nothing was known about her whereabouts. When Rori's relatives and friends did not receive any news from her for several days, they became alarmed. Fearing the worst, they filed a missing person report with the police, which launched a massive search. Flyers with the photo of the missing person were posted all over the area, but all efforts to find Rori Hache proved futile, and only the results of the DNA test brought the horrible news, confirming that she had become a victim of a violent crime. However, the investigation did not end there. Law enforcement faced a difficult task to find the rest of her body parts and piece together all the fragments of this tragic puzzle. And it seemed that success was near, but it came so unexpectedly that it exceeded all expectations. 2 months after the gruesome torso discovery, residents of the upstairs apartment at 19 McLinn Drive experienced persistent sewage problems. The situation escalated to the point where the couple had to call a plumber on December 29th. Since no blockages were found in the upper apartment, the workers asked permission to enter the apartment of 45-year-old Adam Strong, located on the floor below. When the plumbers started working in his toilet, the air filled with an unbearable stench, different from the usual smells. The situation further escalated when Adam's behavior became nervous. He constantly walked around the room, closely monitoring every move and asking many questions. Despite being annoyed by his behavior, the plumbers tried to ignore it. Strong justified himself by saying that he was just curious because he himself had tried to cope with the problem, but to no avail. Perhaps they would have completely ignored Adam if it were not for the shocking discovery inside the pipe. The workers pulled out a 45-centimeter piece of human flesh with attached hair. To their horror, stunned by the gruesome discovery, they immediately notified the police. Within minutes, law enforcement arrived at the scene and confirmed that what was found was indeed human remains. After gathering all the necessary information from the plumbers and the alarmed couple, the officers began a conversation with Adam Strong, preparing for unexpected revelations. But nothing could have prepared them for what the suspect told them. Lowering his head, he confessed that it was human flesh, and if they needed the rest of the body parts, they were in his freezer. Strong was instantly arrested, and the police began searching the apartment. What they saw resembled a house of horrors, dirt everywhere, and the air was permeated with an unbearable stench of decay. In the bathroom, it turned out that Adam had dismantled the toilet, trying to eliminate the blockage. But the real horror awaited law enforcement. In the bedroom in the freezer lay the remains of a young woman with her head hidden in a bag. The body was in a state of decomposition, as Strong had said. Among the remains, a tattoo with the inscription "Je vis I live" was found exactly the same as Rori Hache had. Further DNA examination confirmed that the remains from Adam Strong's apartment belonged to the missing Rori. There was more than enough evidence of her presence there. The girl's blood was found on the walls and ceiling of Adam's bedroom, and his biological fluids were found on her underwear. Rori's sneakers lay wrapped in plastic, spattered with blood. Police also discovered an improvised dissection table set up by Strong. The realization that it was on this table that Adam dismembered his victim made law enforcement officers shudder. During the search of the apartment, numerous sex toys, restraints, and a homemade bomb were also found. Fortunately, the explosives were neutralized in time, and although no one could figure out its origin, due to the lack of direct evidence of Strong's involvement in Rori's murder, the police could not charge him, Instead, he was charged with abusing the body. It was time for the investigation to get to know the life of this 45-year-old man more closely. Adam Strong, about whom little was known, settled in a rented apartment on McLinn in early 2007. For many years, he worked as a security guard on a film set in Oshawa and as a gas station attendant at 2 different stations in Ajax. Those who knew Strong described him as an eccentric man with a sinister character who considered himself smarter than he actually was. He could talk incessantly, not knowing when to stop. One of Adam's ex-girlfriends, whose name has not been disclosed, described him as cruel and prone to excessive control. Adam's landlady, Eugenia Papadakis, also had unpleasant impressions from communicating with Strong. In March 2017, after a fire in the house, she and her granddaughter visited Adam's apartment on McLinn Drive. The dwelling turned out to be cluttered with garbage, food scraps, and all sorts of junk. Needless to say, what they saw stunned the women. In addition, Strong showed an unhealthy interest in pornography, which indicated his passion for explicit content. These observations allowed a deeper look into his psyche and shed light on the dark, disturbing world that reigned in the suspect's apartment. However, despite the tragic circumstances, the evidence gathered was still insufficient to charge him with murder, so the detectives focused on obtaining a confession from Adam Strong. The morning of December 30th, 2017 was marked by the interrogation of Adam Strong, conducted by detectives from the Homicide Investigation Unit, Darren Short and Herman Daroga. By that time, the suspect had already managed to contact his lawyer. The investigators realized that this was their only chance to get valuable testimony from him, because the next day, there was to be a hearing on the possibility of releasing Strong on bail. After that, it would be impossible to interrogate him without a court order. Time was running out, so the detectives had to get important information from Adam by any means necessary. Starting the interrogation, the investigators had no clear idea what to expect. Deep down, they hoped that Strong would be nervous, because he had finally been caught.
So Adam, my name is Detective Short.
Hello, Detective.
My first name is Darren. This is Detective Durego. And what's your name?
Adam.
Last name?
Strong.
Strong, okay. As of right now, what I want to tell you is the charge you're going to be facing right now is indignity to a body.
Instead, they were faced with an imperturbable, collected man who showed outright indifference to his situation. But the biggest problem was getting him to talk about the events related to Rori Hache. Adam's stubbornness was surprising, especially considering his previous confession about human remains in the freezer. Realizing that time was running out, the detectives decided to change tactics. They tried to touch Strong's emotions, hoping to awaken at least a drop of remorse or sympathy for the victim and her loved ones. However, all attempts by investigators to get the desired answers were shattered against a wall of evasions and changes of subject.
How did you know Rori?
I'm not saying anything, I'm sorry.
Did you kill Rori?
Sorry, I'm not saying anything.
Adam's responses were shocking, but the only thing that seemed to affect him were photos of Rori, which he refused to look at. It was obvious that the suspect could no longer bear her gaze, and although the evidence gathered was quite enough to prove Rori Hache's presence in Adam's apartment, the ultimate goal of the detectives was to uncover the truth about what happened and what led to the girl's tragic death. Unfortunately, Strong proved to be a tough nut to crack. No answers to questions about Rori. 2 hours later, it became obvious that the interrogation had reached a dead end. Adam's refusal to provide anything substantial raised more questions than answers. Having failed to succeed, the investigators reluctantly decided to stop the interrogation. What exactly brought Rori Hache and Adam Strong together remained a mystery. Fortunately for the detectives, the suspect was not released on bail, so he remained in custody. Meanwhile, Oshawa police continued to search Adam's house, hoping to stumble upon new evidence and clues. The coroner's report on Rori's autopsy shed some light on the circumstances. It turned out that the girl's body had numerous injuries, including skull fractures. However, the forensic expert could not say with certainty whether these injuries were inflicted before or after her death. In addition, traces of drugs were found in the victim's body, and signs of the use of a restraining device were found on the body. Among the findings in Strong's house, the detective's attention was drawn to a bent hammer on which Rori's DNA was found. Investigators suggested that it was the murder weapon. However, even this was not the most shocking discovery. even when it seemed that nothing more would be found. In July 2018, 7 months after Adam's arrest, a hunting knife covered in human tissue was found in a kitchen drawer. Examination showed that the DNA found on the blade did not belong to Rori. Instead, it matched the genetic profile of another girl, Candace Fitzpatrick. Candace was born on February 3, 1989, and little is known about her childhood. The girl's parents, William Fitzpatrick, and a woman whose name has not been disclosed, divorced. After that, William moved to Alberta, and Candace stayed with her mother in Oshawa. Her life was chaotic and disorderly. At some point, she ran away from home, forcing her father to go looking for her in Oshawa. After reuniting, Candace declared her desire to live independently. And by the age of 19 in 2008, her life had turned into complete disorder. Like Rori, Candace was a troubled girl who struggled with drug addiction and engaged in prostitution to get money for her next fix. She could disappear from home for days or weeks at a time, but always returned. Until March 2008, from then on, her relatives never saw her alive again. William, growing increasingly worried about his daughter, launched a massive search throughout Oshawa. Oddly enough, an official missing person report for Candace was only filed with the police in 2010, 2 years after her disappearance. William reported that back in 2008, he had repeatedly contacted law enforcement, but they did not take the case seriously due to the peculiarities of Candace's lifestyle. 10 long years of painful uncertainty passed before the Fitzpatrick family finally learned the terrible truth they had long feared. The shocking coincidences between the fates of Candace and Rori were not limited to difficult life circumstances alone. Even outwardly, the girls were strikingly similar. The cruel irony of fate is that despite the 10-year difference in their disappearances, both died at the hands of the same person. It is unbearable to realize that if Adam had been exposed after Candace's murder, Rori could have been alive. The remains of Candace Fitzpatrick still have not been found, and the solution to this chilling mystery is known only to one person. Investigators managed to convince the prosecutor to drop the initial charge against Adam Strong and reclassify it as a charge of first-degree murder of Rori Hache and Candace Fitzpatrick. This gave detectives the opportunity to interrogate the suspect again. Realizing the importance and complexity of the case, the Oshawa police leadership involved Detective Paul Mitten in the investigation, a highly qualified and experienced investigator known for his ability to unravel the most complicated crimes. On November 18, 2018, 11 months after the first interrogation, Adam Strong again found himself face-to-face with the investigation. This interrogation was to be decisive. To the surprise of Detective Paul Mitten, the suspect suddenly began voluntarily sharing information.
Adam, how you doing? Good, you? Had better days. Oh. I understand I'm in a lot of trouble. Is there any way I can get a cigarette?
What are you going to hankering for?
Wendy's triple?
Yeah, that's doable.
No pickles? Iced tea, no ice? 2, their value, spicy chicken wraps, and a grilled chicken Caesar salad.
Okay.
Is that outrageous?
No, that's doable.
I don't know how appropriate this is, but I'd like you to pass on to her mother and her father my condolences. I would like to, and I've fielded this to my lawyer, and he's not interested in it, and I don't understand why, of spilling the beans and being as comfortable as I can in jail. Not like $100,000 like Picton, but like an allowance. I don't know. I don't know. Like internet access. Like I don't have anybody who's gonna buy me TV. She's definitely deceased.
Yes.
Yes.
And you clearly have said, I disposed of her.
Yes.
Yes.
Tried to. But unfortunately was foiled by inadequate plumbing.
Yep.
And that's a freaking shame. Not for me. For me.
Yeah, for you. Yeah. You sound really selfish when you say that.
Sorry. I don't expect to get out of the jail free card. I don't. I just want to be comfortable in jail, man.
Okay.
I didn't feel it. I'm really sorry.
Obviously, hours leading into a couple of days, I would imagine.
No, it was all done in one evening.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. I couldn't. Yeah, really? Sorry, man. I don't remember.
Really?
Yeah, it wasn't important to me, man.
I hope one day the light bulb goes off for you. Not that you're find remorse, but just for you to realize you could help some people feel better.
Yeah.
Adam was convinced that their conversation would be limited exclusively to the topic of dismemberment of bodies. He did not even suspect that his own careless confessions and slips of the tongue would allow investigators to draw key conclusions about the entire chronology of events related to the horrific crimes. The interrogation lasted 10 grueling hours and ended only when Detective Mitten felt he had obtained all the necessary testimony.
Is it safe to assume as an investigator that Candace is
I can't go into that.
Similar?
I can't go into that.
How did you meet Candace?
You know what? So long ago, I have no idea.
Do you remember you met her like more than once, or was it just one time you met her?
Sorry, because every time she came to my house, she left my house. Under her own power.
Candace, given the fact that we're gonna assume because of tissue found on that knife, the gutting knife, that came back as Candace's. Why not use that on Rori?
Didn't even think of it.
Because her DNA wasn't found.
Didn't even think of it. I'm a real bad procrastinator, and that is really a detriment to myself.
On September 28, 2020, when 12 years had passed since Candace's disappearance and 3 years since Rori's disappearance, Adam Strong appeared in court on charges of these murders. Despite numerous evidence gathered against him, he refused to plead guilty to both counts. During the trial, the prosecution presented a powerful evidence base, including stunning records of interrogations that supported their case against Adam Strong. Testimony from Petra Danchin about the violence she suffered at the hands of the defendant further strengthened the weight of the accusations. Although Adam never revealed the details of Rori's death during interrogations, prosecutors built their case based on the available facts. According to their version, Strong lured the girl to his house by promising money for intimate services. As soon as she entered, he tied her up and brutally beat her with a hammer found in his home. Horribly, at that moment there was no one on the upper floor, so no one heard the desperate cries for help. After the murder, Adam dismembered Rori's lifeless body and threw the torso into Oshawa Harbor. Geolocation data from her mobile phone confirmed that on September 4th, a week before the discovery of human remains, Strong was in that area, which only strengthened the evidence against him. Prosecutors also expressed confidence that Candace suffered the same fate at the hands of the killer, although her remains had not been found at that time. Lawyers, however, insisted on Adam's non-involvement in Rori's death, claiming that death occurred as a result of a drug overdose, and their client was only trying to get rid of the body. As for Candace, the defense claimed that there was a lack of evidence that she had died in Strong's house at all. They also emphasized the limited size of the freezer, which could hardly hold the remains of 2 victims. However, having carefully examined all the evidence presented, Judge Joseph DeLuca came to the unshakable conviction of Adam Strong's guilt. He rejected the defense's arguments and found the prosecution's evidence convincing and incriminating. Strong tried to justify his actions with the traumatic experience of his childhood. According to him, at an early age, he was subjected to a brutal attack that left an indelible imprint on his psyche. Adam even expressed sympathy for the families of the deceased, but the sincerity of these words was highly doubtful. His behavior demonstrated an alarming level of indifference, lack of remorse, and signs of a split personality. The materials presented during the trial vividly demonstrated that Adam Strong was well aware of the severity of his actions and their consequences. He acted consciously and prudently, without feeling any remorse. In fact, the defendant viewed prison as a way to escape from life's troubles. In the face of unemployment and financial hardship, he was ready to exchange his freedom for the basic benefits that imprisonment could guarantee. The court found that Rori Hache's death occurred as a result of an attack, so Adam Strong was found guilty of first-degree murder. As for Candace Fitzpatrick, his guilt was classified as manslaughter. In May 2021, Strong was sentenced to life imprisonment. In addition, for the murder of Candace, he received an additional 80-year term, which is to be served concurrently with life imprisonment. This is the maximum punishment provided for by the country's legislation. Although nothing could bring back the dead girls, Rori and Candace relatives felt that justice had finally prevailed. In July 2021, Strong provided valuable information about the location of Candace Fitzpatrick's remains. Thanks to his testimony, on November 4th of the same year, the police found the place where, according to the criminal, he had buried the girl's body. On November 8th, law enforcement officers finally managed to find human remains. After conducting the necessary examinations, on November 13th, they were officially identified as the remains of Candace. The final identification results were announced at a press conference on February 16, 2022. What exactly made Adam Strong change his behavior and start talking remains a mystery. Some suggest that he sought notoriety through his actions. However, despite the tragic circumstances that united their fates, the families of Rori Hache and Candace Fitzpatrick continue to support each other and together overcome the painful consequences of the horror they experienced. The cases of the murders of these girls have been solved. The victim's family was unspeakably happy after the announcement of the verdict for their daughter's killer, because they understood that he would never leave prison alive. But the investigation suspects that Adam Strong may be involved in other murders as well. In June 2022, during a search of his apartment, the police seized some physical evidence. However, the details of this finding are being kept secret while additional investigations are ongoing. Let's consider the main reasons that led to this tragedy. 1. Drug addiction. Both victims, Rori and Candace, struggled with drug addiction. This made them vulnerable and forced them to engage in risky behavior such as prostitution to finance their addiction. 2. Social isolation. Although both girls had families who cared about them, their lifestyle often led to isolation from loved ones and support. 3. Insufficient attention from law enforcement. In the case of Candace Fitzpatrick, her father's initial reports of her disappearance were not taken seriously due to her lifestyle. Now, I would like to share some important tips on how to avoid similar situations in the future. 1. Fight drug addiction. If you or someone you love is suffering from drug addiction, seek professional help immediately. There are many rehabilitation and support programs that can help overcome addiction. 2. Stay in touch with loved ones. Communicate regularly with family and friends. If you notice that someone close to you is distancing themselves or behaving unusually, don't ignore it. Offer your support and assistance. 3. Be vigilant. If you notice something suspicious in your surroundings, unusual smells, strange behavior of neighbors, don't be shy to report it to the appropriate authorities. Your vigilance can save someone's life. 4. Take disappearances seriously. If someone you know has gone missing, report it to the police immediately. Don't wait, hoping that the person will return on their own. Every hour can be crucial. 5. Teach children about safety. Talk to children about personal safety. Teach them to recognize potentially dangerous situations and people. Explain how important it is to trust their intuition and not be ashamed to ask for help. 6. Don't judge, but help. Instead of judging people for their lifestyle, try to understand their problems and offer help. Often people find themselves in difficult situations due to circumstances they cannot control. This tragic story of Rori Hache and Candace Fitzpatrick demonstrates to us how important it is to be vigilant and caring members of society. We all have a responsibility for the safety of our community. It is important to remember that criminals like Adam Strong often look for vulnerable victims. They may seem like ordinary people, but behind this mask lie dangerous intentions. Therefore, it is critically important to learn to recognize alarming signs and not ignore them. This case also highlights the need to reform the system for responding to missing persons. Regardless of the lifestyle of the missing person, every case must be investigated with the same seriousness and thoroughness. Perhaps if the police had responded more quickly to Candace's disappearance, the tragedy with Rori could have been prevented. Remember that safety is a shared responsibility. Each of us can contribute to creating a safer society. Be attentive to your surroundings, support those who need it, and don't be afraid to ask for help when you feel that something is wrong. In conclusion, I want to emphasize that no person deserves to become a victim of such a terrible crime. Regardless of life circumstances, every life is valuable. We must work together to protect the most vulnerable members of our society and prevent similar tragedies in the future. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Be vigilant but not paranoid. And remember that together we can make our world safer for everyone. Thank you for your attention. I am Detective John Brooks, and I hope that these conclusions will help you better protect yourself and your loved ones. What do you think about this chilling case? Share your thoughts in the comments, and also subscribe to my channel and like the video. Take care of yourself and your loved ones.